Reeya Banerjee, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. I'm glad to have you here today and be able to share your story and get to know you more and allow the creative world a little bit of insight into you and who you are.
Yeah, I'm excited to, if anything I have to say can help people, that's good by me.
Excellent, excellent. Let me give the audience a brief introduction here for you so they get a feel for who you are before we jump into the conversation. You're a versatile, story driven artist, multidisciplinary creator with roots in playwriting, film, and creative nonfiction. Your emotionally raw songwriting weaves narratives grounded in memory, loss, healing, and self discovery. You're an accomplished writer and staff contributor. You're currently a staff writer at Story Screen Presents, where you contribute to Kurtco Media's Moment of Your Time podcast. Uh, Fatal Flaw Literary Magazine, and others. Your literary recognition includes a Pushcart Prize nominee for your work published in Streetlight Magazine, underscoring your distinction in creative nonfiction and storytelling. You're a professional voiceover artist where you've lent your voice to major brands like Beats from Dre and collaborations with respected agencies such as the Yonder Agency and Edge Studio. And as a musician, your current album release, The Place, explores how geography shapes identity, while a prior release, The Way Up, offers a honest chronicle of mental health journeys.
Mhm.
So that's a quite a few things that you have going on creatively. We were
It's
discussing this before we hit record that a lot of creatives have to do that, branch
yeah,
into multiple areas.
yeah. It's quite something to hear it all laid out like that. I'm like, oh, that is a lot. It doesn't feel like a lot when I'm doing it. I'm like, oh wow, okay.
Yeah, I've always found that kind of the same way myself. I've done so many things over the course of the years that it's hard to just concise it down to an introduction.
Yep, for sure.
Um, so, like I mentioned, there's not a whole lot of structure to this other than my first question, and that
Mm.
is, where were you born, and what was life like as a kid for Rhea?
Ooh, okay. I was born in Washington, D.C. My parents, I'm a child of immigrants. My parents are from India. They came here in 1978. Came to DC both for grad school and then stuck around, and then I came along. Childhood for me, the first 4 years of my life, it was very sort of how do I put it? It was I was born in the mid 80s, so it was kind of like, I don't want to say it was free range because you're not going to let a 4-year-old just like wander the neighborhood, but it was we lived in Silver Spring, Maryland, which is a DC suburb, and there was a playground right behind our house,
Okay,
and it was walking distance, and so it was easy to get there. And then also just a neighborhood full of kids, and everyone's parents were around. So it was one of those things where if I wanted to go outside and play on the playground, like, maybe my mom or my dad would walk me there, but they didn't necessarily feel obligated to stay because there's probably like three or four other parents there. I was like, all right, you make sure she doesn't kill herself on the slide or fall off the merry-go-round or whatever.
right, right.
So that was the first 4 years of my life. And it's funny that as I'm describing that, I know that that was the first 4 years of my life because I have seen pictures and I have talked about it with my dad, and I know it happened because there's evidence that it happened, but it was so long ago and so much shit has happened since then that sometimes I wonder if it's like a memory of a memory or if it's like a story I tell myself, because
Gotcha.
my mother was diagnosed with cancer when I was 4 years old. And from there on out for the next 8 years, my life was basically just us dealing with her cancer. And she was diagnosed, she beat it back. It came back again 3 years later. She beat it back. It came back again 3 years later. She beat it back. Then it came back again a year later. And that's when I think her body just, I mean, I'm sure you've heard this before. treatment for cancer is almost
Oh,
worse than the disease, and so there's so much chemo and so much radiation. And, she had to have surgery in 1995 to remove scar tissue in her intestines from radiation treatment from her previous round of cancer. So there's just a lot of hospitals and a lot of
right,
growing up in that kind of environment. But she was, like what was crazy about her, I'm crazy and exceptional about her, is that when she was in remission, you would never know that she was a cancer survivor because she was just very, sees the world, very, very confident, very outgoing. She refused to let the disease, define her. And
yeah,
so in those moments where she was in remission, she was my mom. But then there were those years when she was sick and then she kind of wasn't. So it was kind of like having, and then, and then it was me and my dad, and then she passed away when I was 12. And then it was me and my dad, from there on out. And sometimes I even say that, you know, I feel like I was raised by a single parent even before she passed because she sort of was
right,
only sporadically able to be a parent.
yeah,
So, so that's kind of, those are the broad strokes. That's kind of the big picture. And then, what that kind of looked like on a day-to-day basis, this is something that I've only just kind of been able to put into words recently, is once she was diagnosed with cancer, I would describe the way I felt in the household or the way I was treated in the household. Again, this is with retrospect. I did not have these words to describe it when I was a child. I would
sure,
call it benign neglect. Not malicious, obviously, not, but when you've got a parent who is sick and the other parent is very focused on caretaking the sick parent,
yeah,
I was kind of left to my own devices for a lot of my childhood, those 8 years.
right,
And kind of, I was a little, especially towards the end, I was involved in her caretaking as well, which in retrospect, I think did quite a number on me because that's a lot to put on an 11, 12-year-old child.
for sure,
But then, it was a lot of just, I figured things out for yourself. I taught myself how to cook. My dad showed me how to to do laundry when I was 6 years old. And, I
yeah,
was kind of left to do all of this, kind of raising myself almost. I mean, it's not like he wasn't there and it's not like she wasn't there, but it wasn't really active parenting the way I would see, my peers with
sure,
who had, kind of a more normal family structure, a more normal, quote unquote normal. I don't know if anybody feels they have a normal childhood,
exactly,
but so that's, and then it was me and my dad after my mom passed. And my dad and I have, we have a good relationship. It's difficult, but not difficult in a toxic way. It's just difficult just because it was me and him while she was sick, and then it was suddenly me and him in isolation. And I would describe my relationship with him after she passed. It was very, a lot of my friends have commented that we don't seem to have a typical parent-child relationship. We kind of relate to each other more like friends almost.
sure,
So, and I would say growing up with him was a little bit like living with a really, like a cool but also extremely annoying roommate who
okay,
he also made the house rules. So
gotcha,
that was the kind of dynamic. But we're close. And then we are still fairly close. He lives in at that point we were living in the last few years of my mother's life, we were living in San Francisco. We had a little stint in Chicago in between, and then we moved to San Francisco, and that's where I remained for the rest of my youth until I went to college. And so, yeah, it was just, me and my dad living in the Bay Area and, just a very sort of, very chill kind of parent-child relationship. My friends in school all loved my dad. I joke that my dad was more popular than me, even now. I went to my 20th high school reunion a couple of years ago, and before people are like, "How are you?" They're like, "Oh my God, how's your dad? How's your dad doing?" We love your dad. We miss your dad.
Uh,
So my dad's a cool guy, and he you know, but he's in California. I live on the East Coast. I've lived in the New York area for pretty much my entire adult life. I came to New York for college and then stayed.
okay.
So we talk frequently. We text daily. He likes to come visit me because he likes to come visit New York. I don't go back as often as I did in college, mostly because I'm really bad on airplanes. I just have terrible, terrible anxiety. And
Same.
a long flight to California, and he doesn't mind flying. So I was like, yes, come visit me. We've got a guest room. It's all good, you know. Um, but yeah, that was sort of my childhood experience was just, the first 4 years was sort of this maybe idyllic existence that I don't even know if I fully remember. And then there was just sort of 8 years of, watching my mother battle something horrible and sort of being left to my own devices. And then, you know, me and my dad. And then even then, by that point with me and my dad, he knew that I was independent. I could take care of myself. He was the minute I was old enough to get my learner's permit, he was like, let's get you driving because then I don't have to give you rides everywhere.
Right. Yeah.
You can be independent. He was very, very big on making sure that I was able to be independent. Not because he wanted me out of the house necessarily, but he was like, it's better for you. It's easier on both of us if you're not always having to beg for a ride. And so yeah, so that was my childhood experience, and it's something that um when my mom passed, my dad and I were and some of it is just we weren't necessarily expecting her to pass when it happened. It's one of
Hmm.
those things where I think you kind of, when you're dealing with somebody who's been sick for that long, you're always kind of maybe quietly in the back of your mind preparing for it as something. It's on the back burner, but you're not necessarily thinking, okay, it's going to happen next month, it's going to happen 6 months from now. But you're kind of subtly preparing for it, but we weren't expecting it when it happened. It wasn't like she was in palliative care or hospice care or anything like that. She was just in another cycle of cancer treatment at that point. And her, I think her body just was like, nope.
Gave out.
Yep. And so it caught us by, so it's one of those things where it caught us by surprise, but it didn't catch us by surprise, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And she was also very much the kind of person where she was like, whenever I do go, I forbid you to allow that to define yourself. Don't sit around and wallow in misery and oh, woe is me. She's like, that's not, I want you guys to be happy and live a full life, and obviously don't forget about me, but don't fall victim to grief. And I think he would agree with me. I think we took her too seriously.
Mm.
Because he and I, not that we weren't sad, not that we didn't talk about her, not that we didn't, but we both kind of threw ourselves into, okay, we're going to live our lives the way she wants us to live our lives now. We've been taking care of her for all this time, and she would want us to kind of move forward. So he was an ambitious guy. He worked in corporate finance for pretty much his entire career. He started out as an English professor, which is just kind of a funny story. He has a PhD in English literature. And then my mother was an attorney. When she got pregnant, my dad was like, I like teaching more than I like the other parts of academia, like the publishing and the conferences and the networking and all the kind of
Right.
circle jerk bullshit.
Right. Right.
And then, she was the primary breadwinner as an attorney, but they knew she was going to have to go on maternity leave. And my dad was like, babies are expensive and professors don't make any money. I don't know
Yeah.
if I want to do this anymore. So he went to business school and landed in banking. And then that's my entire life knowing him. He worked in corporate finance, but he's got this very literary, creative bent. And I think that is something. He's a writer as well. And I
Okay.
think very much that part of me is something that I got from him. He loved to read. We talk about, writing all the time. And so,
Yeah.
so he was ambitious. So he was like, okay, I'm going to throw myself into my career. And I was, I was a theater kid back then. So I was like, okay, I'm going to get really into, being in plays and writing plays and getting involved in, arts and performing and stuff like that. And, doing well in school and, it was all very like future. Let's figure out what the future is going to hold for us. And then at a certain point, it happened at a different time for both of us. When my dad was in his, it was when I was in college, so he was in his mid 50s. He took a job in New York in purchase with MasterCard. I
Okay.
was in my junior year of college at that point, and I think his thought process was, "Hey, I'll move there. She's in college in New York. We'll be closer together, and that might be a good thing." And then what he realized very quickly, number one, was he'd been living in the Bay Area a long time, so there's a lot of culture shock that he was not really prepared for. The minute the temperature dropped below like 60 degrees, he was like, "Oh hell no." Like,
For sure.
and then the job was also very, very high pressure. And he was at a point where he was like, do I need to be working 80-hour weeks at this point? She's in college. She's fine. Maybe I need some space to have a life of my own. But it all kind of coalesced in a way, like he came to those realizations as a result of him having like, I don't want to say he had a nervous breakdown. That's not really how I would describe it, but he had a little bit of like an implosion, is what I would call
Okay.
it.
All
Um,
right.
and he also like all of his friends were back in the Bay Area, so he's very isolated. I visited him when I could, but I was in college, and I visited him some weekends with every intention of, I'd bring my textbooks and be like, I'm going to do my homework while I'm visiting my dad over the weekend, and then what I would do instead was just watch junk TV with him and eat takeout, and then get back to school on Monday and be like, oh shit, I'm behind. So I had to tell him at a certain point, like, I can't be coming home every weekend. And I think that was also something that he was like, okay, well, I'm not going to be able to depend on her for a social outlet. And then he was like, well, so is it appropriate to depend only on your daughter as your social outlet? So he um, kind of had a big reckoning with himself in that regard of like, what does it mean to be like it was him and his dog. He's like, okay, now, my daughter's an adult, still my child, but she doesn't need me the way she used to. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm me in the world, and what do I really want to do with my life? And he hadn't really ever thought about that in a real conscious way up until that point. And I think that's when he started to be like, oh, this is where having my wife would have
Right.
been helpful, just to have the other person in the house, the sounding board, the support system. He can't depend on me the way he could depend on a spouse. That's just not the way the relationship works or should work. And so I think that
Sure.
was where he was like, oh, there's a lot of just grief that he hadn't unpacked. So he moved back to the Bay Area. He was like, I'm done with the East Coast. I tried, not really my thing. Okay. Um, and he did some work on himself, and he figured some things out, and he got back in with his circle of friends, and he took up yoga, and he got really really into that. But he struggled for a while, and I watched him struggle, and I tried to be helpful, as helpful as I could, in the dynamic of our relationship. But I also was just kind of like, again, very much with the arrogance of youth. I was like, nah, that's never going to happen to me. I've figured things out. I know who I am, and I'm not defined by what happened to my mom, and I'll be fine. And then 10 years later, I had an actual nervous breakdown, for
Okay.
just due to unprocessed grief. It kind of coincided with which felt very weird. It coincided with my um, Tim, my long-term partner. We've been together for 7 or 17 years, depending on how you do the math.
Okay.
And he moved in with me, and that was when we were like, okay, we're gonna make this is a real relationship now. This isn't just casual, whatever. And that was a big milestone, and I was very happy, and he was very happy. And then there's just something about the way those like that big the enormity of that decision, and that sort of like, okay, this is the life, this is the future, this is my adult life, this is the partnership I'm going to be in now. And it collided with all of the unprocessed grief that I had not dealt with. So it's like I'm experiencing intense emotions like love, happiness, exhilaration. And then it was like my psyche was like, wait, hang on, slow down. you
Yeah.
have to you still haven't dealt with this other junk. And I was so surprised when it started to, like I dealt with depression, in college. My bipolar disorder runs on both sides of my family. So,
Okay.
it was diagnosed when I was in college. That's usually when symptoms tend to show up in your early 20s. But I was medicated and I was doing fine. I'm not one of those people who goes off my meds. I was like, I like my meds. They make me functional. I can hold down a job. I can not be an asshole to people. Like, that's great. I'm on board with that.
Yeah.
Um, and then the meds stopped working and I was horrendously depressed. And it was just so strange to be like, I should be happy. This is a big moment in my life and I should be happy. And instead, I just felt like I was completely like going off the deep end. And and I've talked to many therapists over the years and trying to understand like why would something that's so a happy thing in my life have caused me to fall into like a deep pit of like despair to the
Right.
point where I got to the point where I was suicidal. And because what was happening was I was depressed and Tim had moved in with me and it was supposed to be a happy thing, but I was depressed. And then it was like, he's here, we should be happy, but I'm making his life miserable because I can't get a hold of my own self. And, you know, to his credit, he didn't go, running, but he was, this isn't exactly what he signed up for either. He didn't put it in those words, but I'm sure that's not really what he was expecting when he moved in with his girlfriend. And so there was a
Sure.
part of me that felt guilt. And so it was like the guilt was compounding the depression and the depression was compounding the guilt and felt like I was treating him badly. I had a hair trigger temper. I was freaking out all the time. And I was just like, I'm no good to anyone right now. And that kind of got me to this just very, very, very dark place.
Okay. So I don't want to overshadow this part of what you're dealing with at that point in life.
Hmm.
What I would like to do though is go back to the childhood scenario.
Hmm. Sure.
Um, because you mentioned you guys moved a few times uh,
Hmm.
before you ended up in New York. When you started off in elementary school, was that in Chicago? Did that take place, or were you still in Maryland?
I was still in Maryland. I did kindergarten and half of first grade in Maryland. That
Okay,
was also a rough transition to move halfway through a school year.
right,
Um, and the school that I was at in Maryland, it was a Quaker school. I love that. I still remember that was like some of my happiest like childhood memories were at that school. I had, it was just a really, really great environment. The teachers were amazing. I had great friends and it was just like really, really like a fun school experience. And then my dad got a job that took us to Chicago. And I think in retrospect, they would have timed it differently so I could at least finish out the school year.
sure,
But what happened was you know, fall semester ended, we moved, and then I started at a new school in Chicago, halfway
right,
through first grade. Always tough being a new kid. It's very awkward being a new kid halfway through a school year. And it was a very different school experience. It was the Quaker school I attended, in Maryland was, it's a Quaker school. It was very, like the way the Quakers approach education and stuff like that. It was a lot more, I don't want to say informal, but it was just a lot more like, kind of friendly and open. And I don't want to say hippie like, but it was just a more joyful school experience. And I ended up in a school in Chicago that was it was a fancy private school. It was a country day school.
okay,
Um,
gotcha.
and just a lot of very, very rich kids whose parents voted for George H.W. Bush in the election. So that's demographically, that's kind of who I was dealing with, just a very, very conservative environment. Um, and it was a larger class size, just a bigger school in general. It was a K through 12 school. And I felt so very small and so very alone. And then, coming in halfway through the school year, and I was one of maybe three kids of color in my class. It was a very, very white school, and that was something that back then kind of put a little bit of a target on my back. I wouldn't say that I experienced like terrible overt racism, but I was pegged as different.
Sure.
And, and I didn't necessarily think of myself as different. I was born in the
Right.
States and I grew up in the States, and that's my experience, but I look different. And that was, and I have a foreign sounding name. So I felt very uncomfortable and out of place. I did not have many friends in that school. I had one very, very good friend, and that was kind of it. And then where I really kind of found happiness in the brief 3 years we were in Chicago, that was one of the years we were there was my mother's cancer came back, which was very hard. And then I joined outside of school a professional children's choir, the Evanston Children's Chorus. Is that what we were called? I don't even know if it still exists. But it was a really, really great outlet. In retrospect, I see that as kind of that might have been the beginning of my music career,
Okay.
so to speak. Because it was one of these, you had to audition to get in. It wasn't just like a here, sign up on the clipboard kind of thing.
Right.
And I had really, really great friends through that choir, but kids from all sorts of different schools in the area. So not people that I interacted with on a daily basis, but people who I would see twice a week at rehearsal. And that was a really, really good experience. Just not just for the social, just like to feel like I was welcome somewhere, but also just like, the singing in a group of people, and just sort of the sort of the healing and the calm that comes with singing when you're, living in a home where you're watching your mother be very, very sick. And the highlight of my time in that choir was we got to do a performance at, Chicago's Symphony Hall with, the Chicago Symphony. And that was a very, very cool experience. And then, and then right after that, my dad got a job that took him to San Francisco. And at that point, I was like, I cannot believe you're making me move again. Um,
Right.
I only feel like I just am getting comfortable here. I'm still not really wild about school, but I've got this, like great landing pad with the chorus, with the choir, and I want to stay with them.
Yeah.
Um, but it was a good job. It was a job that was too good to turn down. My mother stopped working when her intention always was to go back to work after I had, gotten to kindergarten or whatever, but then she got sick and then she never actually went back to work. She was a great attorney. But she just, it wasn't feasible for her to return to work. So
Right.
it was basically, my dad was the only one pulling an income. So he was like, this is a good job. It's too good to turn down. We need the money. So we moved to San Francisco, and and I think also to a degree my parents thought, I think if you were to ask him now, that the kind of the climate in the Bay Area was probably a little bit better for my mother's health. I don't know if that's true or not, but you're not dealing with the extremes of a Chicago winter and
For sure.
like that. And she really loved it there. And so, I had no choice in the matter. I had to come along, but I kind of didn't want to go on principle because I was like, I only just got used to the first move, and now you're making me do it again.
Yeah.
And I kind of, and I ended up in a school very similar to the one that I was in Chicago, but it was a little bit friendlier just because culturally people in the Bay Area are friendlier, and a little bit more politically in line with the way my family was. So it wasn't like a horrible like, oh, I'm here and people are being mean to me again. It wasn't all bad, but I went there kicking and screaming, and I was always resistant to being there, even when I kind of had, found friends and found a place for myself and got involved in theater in school, and, had outlets that way. There was always a part of me that's like, but I still don't want to be here, just on principle. I can't believe they did this to me again.
Yeah. And
And
what grade level was that?
that was fourth grade.
Fourth grade. Okay.
Yeah.
So I want to back up just a little bit
Sure.
again because your energy completely shifted when you were talking about elementary school at the Quaker school
Yeah.
and that environment. And
Yeah.
I want to dive a little bit into how that kind of shaped that joy for you
Yeah.
outside of the home.
Yeah.
Did- Were you able to connect with some of the other students in a way that seemed easy and natural for you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I would say that it was a very small class size. So I want to say there was maybe 15 of us,
Okay.
12, 15 of us. I called every single one of them my friend. We were all friends. There weren't like friend groups. There wasn't a clique. There wasn't popular kids, not popular kids. We were
Right.
all one unit friends. And I had a couple that I was especially close to. I had like one, BFF back then or whatever. His name is Philip Mussenden. I still remember his name. He probably doesn't
Oh,
remember
wow.
me, but his name, I'll never forget him.
Yeah.
So we used to play on the teeter-totter. That's
Okay.
like what I remember. God,
Yeah.
30 years later. And yeah, no, I would say that, it was just all, it was a community. It was, like a community. It was like a little, like a family outside of the family. It was just, very, very, warm and welcoming. And yeah, no, I felt like I looked forward to going to school every day. I mean, it was one of those things where I got the flu one week and I was like determined to go to school anyway. And my mom was like, no, you can't do that. You can't do that. You're going to get everyone else sick. And I was like, I want to go to school. I want to see my friends. So that's and again, it's so funny because it was September through December of 1991. 1990, yes, 1991. Such a short little time of
Yeah.
life, but I still remember it like, you know, maybe not as vividly as, at this point. I'm 40 years old now. I don't know how vivid it is, but the if I don't remember vividly like people's faces or what the playground looked like or anything like that, I just do remember the feeling, just how like
Yeah.
welcoming the place was and how comfortable I was in that space. And I never found that level of comfort in any school environment after that going forward. I found a way to make it work,
Right.
but I never felt that feeling of belonging uh,
Yeah.
much ever again.
Did the teachers um, encourage that in terms of making sure that all the students were kind of working together as a unit, kind of
I think
conversing as a unit?
I think so. I think that's kind of very much the Quaker ethos of, just community. I mean, like, if you go to a
Yeah.
Quaker church, or like one of my friends from college, longtime roommate, also, he grew up Quaker, and I went to services with him and stuff like that. And it's, they call each other friends. We're all friends. Like that's how they refer to the congregation, is we're all friends. And so that's the ethos, is that everybody comes in and we're all we're all friends, and then like we were all friends. So
Right. Right.
and I think that's very much just the philosophy of how, just pedagogically, how they go about encouraging how children learn and how children interact with each other. And that was something that when we moved to Chicago, my mom really wanted me to continue to go to a Quaker school. She looked for a Quaker school that she could put me into, because she thought, okay, well, maybe, it would be less rough, at least to be put back into to be put into a school that has a similar ethos. And then there just weren't any Quaker schools
Right.
where we
Yeah.
were moving. So the next best choice was, okay, here's this very, very fancy prep school, which is a dramatic change, just culturally, just a big dramatic change. So yeah, and then, you know,
And with getting to the point where you're stepping into this choir, was that from influence of your mom, or was that from influence of somebody at the school that suggested moving into the choir? How did that take
That's a
place?
that's a great question in Chicago. So a couple things happened musically as well around the same time, and that is when we were in Chicago, I also started taking piano lessons.
Okay.
And I did not want to be taking piano lessons. That was not the instrument I was interested in. And I wanted to be a bass player, like right off the bat. My mom was a big Beatles fan.
Really?
And,
Okay.
she had me listening to all the Beatles songs, all the Beatles records in order. And I wanted to be a bass player. I tell people, Paperback Writer by the Beatles, the bass line in that song, that's what made me want to become a bass player.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. And Paul was my mom's favorite Beatle. And so I was like, come on, like I want to be a bass player. Paul's a bass player. This seems like a no-brainer to me. And she was like, she had this fantasy that I was going to grow up and become a concert pianist and play Carnegie Hall. And I was like, I don't really, that's not really what I'm into. So that was a point of contention between her and me basically for the rest of her life. I just I didn't want to be taking piano lessons. My piano teacher in Chicago was also very scary. She was very
Okay.
mean. She was very strict. I didn't practice because A, I didn't want to, and B, then you go to a piano lesson and you got a teacher yelling at you, and I'm like, well, I really don't want to do this.
Right.
Um, my dad had studied violin when he was in high school, and my mom had studied voice when she was a child as well. She grew up in New Delhi. She actually studied with one of Ravi Shankar's students. Ravi Shankar was a family friend, apparently.
Okay.
So that's kind of a fun little fun little tidbit. So they both wanted me to have a music education, and my dad in particular was like, I want, he wanted me to get music theory because that was something that was valuable to him, learning violin.
All
And I
right.
will say that I did get a very good foundation in music theory from this very frightening teacher. She kind of almost, I don't want to say she beat it into me. She didn't hit me, but she inflicted music theory on me in her very, very strict, scary
Sure.
way. And it
Yeah.
has come in handy. But it was I didn't want to be playing the piano, but I also loved singing. And I think my mother, when during the period of time when she was in remission there, she could sense that I was not happy in school and lacking any options for how to, like, do we pull her out of school again and make her a new kid somewhere else, or what,
Right.
like in the absence of any sort of clean option to make school better for me, she was like, well, let's get her involved in something extracurricular that's social. And I was already doing the piano stuff, but I liked singing. And she was like, she did some research. She found out about this choir. She was like, let's give it a shot. See if I can get
Okay.
you, get me on the audition for, to join them. It was like this a summer session. And I got in. And that was sort of, I think that was her way of just trying to see if there was some way to make just my social life less miserable.
Yeah.
And it worked, and so I give her in my mind I'm always just kind of like, man, I can't believe she forced me to take piano lessons for all that time. That was such a pain in the ass, and it feels like she didn't understand me. She didn't understand what I was about, but she understood me enough to know that I needed something else in that environment when we were in
Right.
Chicago. And so
Right.
I do have to give her credit for that she saw that I was struggling, and she was like, well, what can we do to at least make some of this easier? And it worked. So
Right. Just on another note too, with your parents immigrating to the U.S., after they immigrated, did you still have contact with family and grandparents potentially back in India, or how did
yes,
that work for you guys?
a little bit. My parents, my mother's parents, apparent, unfortunately, they both passed before I was born.
Okay.
My mom was the youngest of six kids, which in retrospect, she was like, number one, I think there might have been an accident, and number two, that's way too many kids. I'm an only child. It's funny. All of my cousins on my mom's side of the family, the children of the six siblings, we are all only children. And
Really?
yeah, and
Wow.
the one cousin on that side of my family who I'm closest to, he's like, I think that's by design. He's like, I think all of them were like one and done. Six is too many. One is just fine. It's just very funny that we're all only children. I was not very close to her family
Okay.
as a result because her parents passed away. My parents actually met through her older brother. My dad went to graduate school in New Delhi at the same school where my mom's older brother taught. He was a history professor there.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And then my dad, he finished his master's in English and then he started teaching there as well. And my uncle was trying to turn his PhD dissertation into a book. And he was like, I don't really know how to do this. I need someone to help me edit. And he kind of, heard about this new professor in the English department. And he was like, you know, writing, why don't you help me with this? And I was like, sure, why not? We'll see where it goes. And then he met my mother through my uncle that way. And so basically my dad and my uncle were best friends. And then he started dating my mom. And then my uncle got a little weird about that. He was like, I don't know how I feel about this. And then and my mom was very close to her older brother too. I think that was also part of that. There was a little bit of a tension there, not just like, hey dude, you're with, dating my younger sister, but also just like he felt like she was pulling away as well, which is that's
Okay.
just what happens. But they
Yeah.
were close growing up, and I think just because there were six of them, and it was, like, and there were the three oldest sisters, and then there were two brothers and my mom was close to the two brothers, and so I think he felt her pulling away, and he was like, no, don't, I don't want to lose you, and it got a little complicated. Um, and so for a while, like they stayed in touch, but not as closely as my dad stayed in touch with his family. And so my dad grew up in Calcutta. My grandparents lived there. My dad's younger sister lived there. His older brother lived there. My dad's older sister moved to Paris after college. She's an interesting lady. I love her. Her mission in life, my dad says, for as long as he knew her, was when she grew up, she wanted to be French. Um, so she took French, studied French in school, French literature, French language. She taught. She got a scholarship to the Sorbonne, and she left for Paris with like $50 in her pocket and just ambition. And she went there and she studied there and she met my uncle there. She was very, very sweet, guy from the south of France who moved up to Paris for school, and they got married, and she's lived there. She's lived in France for 60 years. She's almost more French
Oh,
than my uncle, I would say at this point. Um,
right.
so we were in touch with her as well. And my cousin, her son, he's half French, half Indian. He and I always kind of had a bond because we're the two cousins on that side of the family who were not raised in India. My dad's older brother has three kids who were still raised in India. So just culturally, me and my cousin's name is Pierre Francois, which is a very, very French name.
Right.
I call him PF, which annoys him. I started doing that when I was a kid. I was like, your name's too long, man. Sorry, I can't. And he was like, oh, okay. And then the whole family started calling him that. And he was like, oh, of course. Okay. All right. Thanks. Thanks
Yeah.
a lot.
Right.
But yeah, no, so PF and I were always, we always had that sort of bond as like the outsiders, at least on, that side of our family, just because we were not raised in India. Um, and we would visit. How often would we visit? When I was young, we visited a few times when I was very young, and then during the time period when my mother was sick, just kind of any sort of international travel was on hold.
Gotcha.
And then after she passed, my dad and I would go every year. We would go to Calcutta just to visit my grandmother. My grandfather, my dad's father, passed away when I was about 6 or 7. Um,
Okay.
but we would go there to see her, and then my dad's younger sister moved in with their mother, just to help, so she wouldn't be alone.
Sure.
Um, so we would go, I think pretty much almost every year we would go around Christmas time, and spend a couple of weeks there. And then we did that for a while, and then my grandmother passed away in 2005. So I was in college. She was, she was in her 80s. She very long in very interesting life. And
Yeah.
she, but she had Um, she had a stroke when I was still in high school, and then she never really, she never really fully recovered from that, and
Gotcha. Okay.
so that kind of is what ended up being the end for her. And the thing is, when she passed, that was sort of she was sort of my real anchor to India at that point.
Okay.
And losing her kind of was I'm not very close to my cousins who still live there. And I don't dislike them. It's just we just don't have a whole lot,
Sure.
you
Yeah.
know. And so my grandmother was kind of my last anchor to India. And so I actually have not been to India since 2005.
Okay. And was there something special about her that you really remember that
She
made that
Yeah,
connection strong?
she was what I loved about her was she was very quiet. My dad's a bit of an extrovert and very, my grandfather was a big personality. So they balanced each other very well. So she was quiet, but she was just like a very, very keen observer. And she kind of saw all and noticed everything, and she'd file it away in her head, and then you would be talking to her later, and she would just have these really great insights into like because at Christmas time, it was not just my dad and I would visit, and oftentimes my dad's older sister in France, they would come and visit as well. So we'd all kind of like invade their house at the same time. And then my dad and his two sisters would start arguing. They have the same argument that they were having since they were teenagers. And then I'd have my dynamic with my dad, and PF would have his dynamic with his parents. And then we're kind of the two weird, like, foreign kids in India. And I just remember she would just sort of observe it all and take it in and file it away. And I would talk to her later, and she just knew everybody. She just had everybody dialed in like right away. She was like, I know exactly who all of you are. And she's like, she just found the dynamics fascinating of how, like everyone was interacting as they would get old. She was the one who said in those words, she goes, your dad and his sisters are literally having the same arguments that they have been having since they were teenagers. She's like, it's the same fight. It's just they're older, but it's the same basic problem, like.
Yeah.
And as an only child, and my French cousin also an only child, we were also very fascinated because we're siblings. We don't know what that is. So they'd be arguing with each other, and we'd be like, "This is fascinating." And then later on, my French aunt, she was like, "You guys must be horrified," and we're like, "No, this is like a sociological study. This is great. We don't know what this feels like."
Right.
But yeah, no, my grandmother she was just a very, very, keen observer of human behavior. And then when you'd get her talking, and she'd kind of give everybody, her read on everybody or whatever. And you were just kind of like, wow, she's just very, very deeply insightful. But it would just, you'd have to kind of pull it out of her. But when you did, it would be really just like a really fascinating conversation. And
Nice.
just, and then she had all these great stories of when my parents when my dad was a kid, and when my aunts were children, and she just kind of was, again, when you got her talking, she had so much to say, and it was all fascinating. And so that's what I love about her, was that sort of the dichotomy of like, she's quiet, and you'd think, oh, she's quiet, she's shy, she doesn't really have much to say. No, she had a ton to say. You just had to know how to unlock the door,
Right.
and
Right.
you get it all. Um,
So, would you say that based on the conversations that you had with her, that she was a pretty good orator?
oh, that's a good question. I don't know if she was a pretty good orator so much as um, she just she had a really good take on people. I don't know if I would say that she was, because she never went to college. She never really, I don't know at what point she stopped going to school, but she's of that generation where, women didn't necessarily go to college. So I don't know if she was, I don't know if she was nearly as articulate as her children, who all went to college
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
got foundational education. They all went to English medium schools and stuff like that. Um, So she wasn't a good orator necessarily, but she was just very observant. And when you got her talking, she had a lot to say. And sometimes it was a little bit, oh, I noticed this, and that reminds me of this, and that reminds me of this, and oh, and then this. And it's funny because if you talk to Tim, my boyfriend now, he says if I tell a story, I'm the same way. I'll tell a story and then I'll be like, okay, here's a tangent, and oh, and this reminds me of this tangent or whatever. Oh wait, what was I originally talking about? Let me finish that story first. And so that's, I feel like that was a
Sure.
little like what it was like talking with her as well. It was like she had so much to say, and then it would kind of go all over the place. But by the end of it, you'd end up with a lot of really interesting information.
So the conversation was always colorful and
Yes,
brought
yes,
in
it was.
many different angles.
Yep, yep.
Okay.
In her own kind of quiet, dry. She had a very dry personality as well, which is what, when she would make these kind of, very very accurate observations of people's personality, but she would say it in the most dry, deadpan way, and it was hysterical. Like,
Right.
she wasn't necessarily trying to be comedic. That's just who she was. Uh,
Yeah, just a
and
natural.
yeah, just
Yeah.
just naturally very dry, deadpan sense of humor. And so, yeah,
Okay.
she was great. Yeah.
With being born here in the US and then having the opportunity to go back and see the differences in culture,
Hmm.
those are two very different cultural environments
Absolutely. Yeah.
between the US and India.
Yeah.
Was there anything that you can remember from your younger years that may have made a lasting impression on you in terms of being back in that familial culture?
That's interesting. Let me think about that. What I remember honestly when we would go back to visit is um they when and this happens to my dad now too, even though my dad he grew up there. He's been living in the States for 60 years at this point.
Yeah.
But they can tell who even if you're walking around and like you're going to a shopping mall or you're going to like a bazaar or like a place where you're interacting with people or whatever,
Yeah.
even if I keep my mouth shut, they can tell. They can tell that you're not Indian from India. They can tell.
Yeah.
They can probably even figure out that you're American because it has something to do with body language, the way you carry yourself or whatever. I
Okay.
could, I could go out wearing Indian clothes and they still knew. They would know. And the thing is, once they know that you're not really Indian from India, then if you're trying to haggle with them or whatever, they know that they can out haggle you or they got. So I just remember, it was I would go back there and I'm surrounded by family, people who look like me, go out in the world. All of a sudden, it's a city full of people who look like me, but I'm still very much not of this
Out of
place.
place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, and that's, and even within the family too, like when we would get together with the cousins who had grown up there, again, like I'm taller than all of them. And I don't know how much of that is, I mean, my mom was, I'm tall. That makes me sound like I'm super tall. I'm 5'5", which is not that tall, but for an Indian woman, it's on the tall side. My mom was 5'5". Um, my mom always used to say it's because they got, better quality milk in New Delhi than they did in Calcutta. And so that's why she grew tall. And then she was like, and you're tall because you grew up in America and everything's a little bit more nutritionally dense here.
Right. Right.
So I'm taller than my cousins, and I've got this American accent, and I sort of just carry myself in the world in a little bit more of a different way. So even within the family, I was an outsider, and then you go out into the world, and I was an outsider. Um, but I was also a big fan of Bollywood movies, and that was like
Okay.
a big kind of way to connect with my cousins who were there, and then also just Indian like pop culture in general, like
Yeah.
being a fan of those movies really it helps. It's like a social lubricant in some way. Like
Sure.
I might not have much in common with you, but we can talk about this one movie that was a really big hit because we all loved it.
Yeah.
So that was like it was like a little entry point, like a cultural entry point that I was able to access in order to connect with. with my family who was from there, and then also just out in the world or whatever. But yeah,
Gotcha.
very much that strangeness of being around people who look like you, but they know you're not of this place. And
Right.
even if you keep your mouth shut, I was like, what if I don't talk and they can't hear my accent? Nope, they still knew.
It, yeah, that's what I was wanting to see is if that feeling that you felt after the Quaker school of being like out of a comfort zone,
Mm,
being looked at as out of place, so to speak,
mhm.
if that was still the same kind of comparison.
That is a great question, and I've never thought about it that way. But yes, I
Okay,
think you're right.
that's
You're
yeah,
absolutely right. I'm so glad that you said that. That just kind of unlocked something in my head a little bit. Yes, very much so. Very,
yeah.
very much so. Yeah.
All right, so let's go back to Chicago now, and
Mhm.
you're in this choir, and
Mhm.
you're finding essentially your voice,
Mhm. Right.
literally, right?
Right.
And being in that environment, are you finding any of the other members of the choir that you're able to connect to and become friends with?
Yes. Yeah. I had a pretty good, it was again, it was one of those things where how many of us were in the choir? I think there were maybe 25 of us. It felt like a little bit like the Quaker school. It felt like I could call every single one of them a friend.
Yeah,
Some of them I was closer to than others, but it wasn't, again, it was one of these rare experiences where you've got a group of kids and there's no clear like cliques breaking off. There's
right,
no like, social hierarchy. Oh, these are the popular kids. These are the rich kids. These are like whatever makes separates people off.
for sure.
We all got along with each other. There was one girl in particular who I would say was my best choir friend.
Yeah,
And then there were two or three other girls that we kind of were a little unit, not a clique, but we all, like I felt that I was closest to them out of everybody. But again, it wasn't like we were a unit. We separated ourselves from the group. But
yeah,
they were the people who like I would have play dates, with them, outside of choir, because we were close and our parents became close and stuff like that. So, um, yeah, so that was very much, and I think that's why when my parents said, "Okay, we're moving to San Francisco," I was mad, not just because I was like, I don't want to be the new kid again, but I was mad because I didn't want to leave the choir.
yes,
It was the choir that was like the real heartbreaking thing for me to leave behind in that situation. I was like, I can suck up school for as long as I'm in the choir and I have my choir friends and I can sing and I can kind of be in this world and in this community and be able to use my voice. Then that's this I can deal with the bullshit of school. And then
right.
yeah. And then they were like, we're moving again. And I was like, oh man, really? Like, I don't, and it was losing the choir. That was the heartbreak.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine, especially to starting off. You've got that sense of belonging
Mhm.
with the Quaker school, right?
Yeah.
It was super easy. No, um, no characteristics or instances of feeling out of place
Hmm.
whatsoever. And so that starts to form this comfort level within the internal nervous system, right?
Right.
You're not having anything that's coming at you that's like making that flight mechanism go off,
Right.
which is very powerful for the initial years of a child's development.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I can see how this is all playing out with your story so far. You got that comfort zone. Then parents are like, all right, we're going to Chicago, move there. Can't find a Quaker school, but there's this other private school. And then that's a completely different environment because of the way that it's structured, the way that the environment is, the different kids that are there, different mindset of the kids that are there.
Exactly.
And then you find choir.
Yeah.
which has a semblance of the Quaker school, a place where you can feel like you don't have to be worried about everything else coming at you. It's a place of comfort for you.
Yeah.
Um, and then they're like, all right, we're moving again.
Hmm.
So you're getting uprooted
Yeah.
in the comfort zones
Yeah.
that in your early development that
Yeah.
is taking place. Once you get out to California, San Francisco area,
Hmm.
did you find a school there that may have been easy to get into, or was it the same scenario again where it's like out of place, feeling confused, feeling frustrated?
I would say that the elementary school I ended up in, elementary and middle school I ended up in, was certainly a friendlier demographic of kids.
Okay.
So I didn't, and welcoming. So being a new kid wasn't like I'm a pariah.
Yeah.
They were happy to have a new kid and to welcome me into the fold. I and I made friends, but I don't think I can say that I ever found that level of comfort and belonging
Okay.
then. And some of that might have just been because at that point I was like, fuck this shit. I'm tired of trying to, trying to assimilate myself into a new environment again. Like this is ridiculous. And some of it is also just like honestly, Bay Area culture is its very own animal. I don't think
Right.
personality wise I ever really fit into that paradigm.
Okay.
And there's just a lot of, and then I ended up going to a high school. I call it was a hippie ass high school. It was founded in the 60s. It was literally a block away from Haight-Ashbury. It was founded by a bunch of hippies. When I was there, like untraditional grading policies and lots of, like it was very arts focused, which was great because I was involved in
Okay.
theater and stuff like that. And that's when I got into playwriting. And it was very small. I think there was 250 students total when I was there.
Okay.
And it was just, we like mandatory every year. Every class would be sent on a camping trip where we would bond in the, we would, the big one was junior year. They would send us to Joshua Tree and we would bond in the desert for 5 days. And I'm not really a camper. And,
Me
and,
either.
yeah. And
Hate
so,
it.
yeah, shoot, yeah, like 5 days in the desert. I was like, I want to shower. I really want. I want food that's not like oatmeal or like stew or tacos, whatever you can make over a
Right.
campfire. And then also like there's just something about like the idea of like we're doing this so that you can mandatorily bond with your classmates. And I'm just like, oh, come on, really? Like there were 67 of us in my graduating class. We were at the time the biggest graduating class in the history of the school,
Oh, wow.
which is crazy. And again, it was not, it was similar but different to the Quaker school in as much as there were there were cliques, but it wasn't like toxic. It wasn't like the
Yeah.
Mean Girls movie or anything like that. It was just like there were just groups of kids who were into different things. There was the
Right.
theater kids, there were the, like the more kind of sports athletically inclined kids. At that time, there weren't that many. It was still a very hippie school. Our sports teams were a joke.
Okay.
Now all of the alumni mailers I get, they've pivoted to like a hardcore college prep environment. Now all of the alumni mailers I get from them are like sports teams, and this person, like, one of the class of 2012 has gone on to the WNBA, and I'm like, what? Like, that's just
Right.
and the school newspaper is winning national awards. And I was like, when I was there, we could barely manage to put out a school newspaper 3 times a year. Okay. It was just a lot more loosey goosey when I was there. But it was, so we had the arty kids, the theater kids. We had the, like the minority population of kids who are like, into soccer or cross country or
Right.
whatever.
Yeah.
we were in the hate. They're the stoner kids, and like, but and they're fine. They're fun to hang out with. It wasn't like,
Yeah.
oh God, them. But it was definitely, but everyone, there were these little factions, but there wasn't animosity. It wasn't like anybody was looking at anybody else and being like, oh, we don't like you, or we don't
Right.
respect you.
Right.
So it wasn't like toxic, like I said, it wasn't like a mean girl situation. And to a degree, I found people, especially just, getting involved with theater, and specifically like playwriting, and that kind of subgroup of the theater kids who are interested in writing in addition to performing. Um,
Yeah.
I found some close friends that way. Um, Close friends, I say, and I look back on it now, and in retrospect, I'm really only in touch with one.
Okay.
So I mean, and again, not because I hated everybody else, but it's just, there's only one person who I felt close enough connected to that I've stayed in touch with all these years. I went back for my 20th reunion a couple of years ago. I was happy to see everybody. Everyone was happy to see me. It wasn't like, oh God, her,
Yeah.
like, um, but it just, the ties were just not that strong.
Sure.
They were good kids, they were good people. It's not like I hated my life there,
Hmm.
but it wasn't that comfort thing that you're talking about of
Yeah.
like the choir or the 3 months in the Quaker school. It was still always, I still always felt a little bit of a detachment.
Okay.
Um, and that's again, it wasn't terrible. It wasn't, I have a lot of very happy memories from high school. It wasn't a misery the way it was when I was in the school in Chicago. Um,
Sure.
but again, just not very, just the ties that I formed there just weren't very strong. Um,
Gotcha.
and then, and my whole thing, I would say pretty much from the moment we got to California up through when I graduated from high school, my mission was to get out.
Right.
I don't want to be here. I didn't want to come to California to begin with. I don't think culturally this is not my personality. I'm not really into this hippie stuff.
Yeah.
That's not really my thing. And at that time, I mean, now San Francisco has become just tech bros and everything's overpriced, and it's, like, but when I was growing up there, it still had a little bit of the flower child sort of vibes. Now it's just, again, when I went back for my 20-year reunion, I was walking around the hate, and then I was kind of just driving around the city and looking at neighborhoods, and the Mission District used to be like the don't go there after dark part of the city, and now it's just like apartments that cost $3,000 a month to rent. And I'm just like, oh my God, like but anyway, that's
Right.
what happens when you let Google and Facebook take over. So um but yeah, I wanted to get out. And so when I was applying to colleges, I did not apply anywhere in California. I was like East Coast, East Coast, East Coast, whatever I got to do to get back to the East Coast.
Okay.
I don't know if I was subconsciously looking to get back to the Quaker school or not, but I was just like, I was like East Coast. I was like, my happiest memories are from when we lived on the East Coast.
Yeah.
I'm aiming to get back there. And I ended up getting into Vassar, which is in the Hudson Valley in New York, and
Okay.
I went there. And 4 years there, it was fine. Again, it wasn't. College is a little bit different, I think, than high school, just because it's a larger. I mean, and Vassar's a small school, compared to like a large university. I think there's 2,400 students total at any
Right.
time.
What was the what was the decision maker for you deciding to go to Vassar over maybe some of the others you were looking?
Uh, that was, of all of the schools that I got into on the East Coast, that was the one that was closest to New York City and
Okay.
had the best theater program. Those were
Got you.
my two, those were my two major parameters, was
Okay.
proximity to New York City and theater education.
Got it.
And then what's funny was I got there, and within 2 weeks of I was intending to declare myself a theater major the minute I got there. I sat in on three of the classes that of the course that was the prerequisite before you could declare your theater major. And that class was it was like a history of theater. So it was like a class where it was like, you're looking at theater as literature. And that's something that was interesting to me as a somebody who's interested in playwriting. So
Yeah.
I was really excited. I was like, oh, this sounds like a cool class. This is a cool prerequisite. And I was in a room full of kids who just they wanted to be doing the acting stuff. They didn't really want to be delving into like, you know,
The writing
history of
part.
the writing process or history or
Yeah.
like delving deep into like, dramaturgy or anything like that.
Yeah.
And I got the sense that the professors didn't really want to be teaching. It was like a team taught class, so all the professors in the department were teaching it. Got the feeling that the professors were just kind of like, yeah, this is a formality. We just have to get through this. And I was like, well, the professors don't even want to be doing this class. Like this is a bummer. Um, and so I was like, what do I do now? And I just ended up going across the hall in the theater and film building, and I ended up as a film major. I was like,
Okay.
I don't want to go far. I like movies. There's still, and there's, and then again, even in the film department, there's the kids who wanted to make student films, but there were enough kids who also were interested in history and film theory and criticism and stuff like that. And that spoke to me very much as, and that sort of literary bent I have when I look at art.
Okay.
So it was a little bit more, it seemed like just the department was more open to that type of learning. And I was like, okay, cool. And I like movies. So win-win.
Right.
Of course, when you're 18 years old, I don't know. I often think that it's really terrible that you ask 18-year-old kids to pick a major and then that's going to maybe determine the course of their life because
Oh, for sure.
I didn't think that through. And then I graduated and I had a film degree and I was like, well, now what do I do? Like,
Yeah.
and I ended up signing up. I was like, I don't know how to pay the rent. I don't know what to do. I signed up with a temp agency. I ended up in the accounting department at a resort in the Hudson Valley, and I have been in accounting my entire career ever since.
Oh, wow.
I've got my resume is hilarious because I've got all of these like accounting jobs and then Bachelor of Arts in film theory. And
Right.
luckily, I don't have to answer. I've been working in accounting long enough that nobody really asks about the nearly 20-year-old degree. But every once in a while, someone looks and goes, well, what's that about? And I go, because I
Yeah.
was 15 and I didn't know any better.
Yeah.
Uh, but I mean, the thing is, I think any liberal arts degree, they teach you how to think, they teach you how to read, they teach you how to think critically and write coherently and communicate well. And I think that that's valuable no matter what the subject matter is. In retrospect, I wish I'd maybe done something a little more practical, but
Well, what's interesting too
Mhm.
is you say you've been in accounting for so long and your dad was in finance.
I know, yeah,
So
we have
it's
kind of
like,
a similar thing happening where he flipped from English to finance, and yeah, no, that's something that we uh noticed at some point in the last 10 years. I was like, did I just do the same thing you did? And he was like, yeah, maybe not for the exact same reason, but
yeah,
it's a question of practicality versus passion, I guess.
for
So,
sure. For
um,
sure.
so yeah, so but yeah, but again, college, it was fun. I had the college experience. It was a larger environment. I found people that I was able to be close to. But again, even in that situation, I never really felt fully comfortable.
Sure.
Even with, and again, I made some really good friends there. I'm in touch with more college friends than I am high school friends, but not in any meaningful way. It's kind of in that sort of superficial Facebook, like I like your post kind of way. And every once in
Right.
a while I'll have I'll text back and forth with a few people, but I don't really, it's not, we're not visiting each other. We're not, not, we're not going to each other's weddings or anything like that. It's
Yeah.
not that kind of, some people end up really close to their college friends that way. And that's just not how it worked out for me. Um,
One
and
of the things that you mentioned earlier too, were I didn't want us to gloss over it earlier in the conversation, but I see the opportunity to start moving back towards it at this point.
mm,
Is the depression you had mentioned started to set in a little bit
mm,
while you're at college.
yep.
Um, do you remember? potentially what year, what time frame, and what may have brought that uh,
It Yeah,
highlight up?
it it started it started pretty early, and I didn't start getting treatment for it until pretty late. It started when I was
Okay.
a freshman. And I think that it was I think the trigger honestly was all of a sudden I'm living away from home. I'm on my own. I'm an adult. I'm responsible for my own self.
Yeah,
And, it's a lot of change. It's a lot of meeting new people. It's a lot of you're responsible. You got to get yourself to class. You got to do your homework. It's very self-directed in a way that you have a lot more guidance when you're in theory, when you're in elementary, high, in middle school, high
for
school.
sure.
You've got people who are keeping you on track.
Yeah,
You're responsible for yourself, being responsible for myself. Now, to a degree, I knew how to be responsible for myself because of my experience growing up with my
yeah,
mother. So
yep.
it wasn't that part that was difficult for me. I think what was difficult for me was that in tandem with, and you're responsible for making sure that you're getting all that you're supposed to be getting out of this fairly
School.
expensive school that you've agreed to attend. And you know, and some of it is also just genetics.
Yeah.
Pretty much all three of my mother's sisters had bipolar disorder.
Okay.
Um, One of my cousins on my dad's side has it as well. So I on both sides, and there is a genetic component to bipolar disorder. And so and again, just like because of the way genetics works, it's not uncommon for that to start coming to the forefront when you're in the kind of early adult years.
For
So I
sure.
think it was a combination of genetics colliding with just a giant change in how responsible I was suddenly being asked to be for my own self.
Yeah.
And I got overwhelmed, and I spent a lot of time partying and
Okay.
drinking too much and having a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun, but I wasn't going to class, and I was pretty sad during the day. I was, and I'm sleeping a lot. And
Right.
then I would kind of my escape would be I'd go out and there were my party friends, and we'd kind of hop around from party to party, event to event, whatever. And it's not hard to get alcohol on a college
Sure. For
campus.
sure. Yeah.
And so I just partied too much and didn't go to class. And what ended up happening was at the end of that semester, I was in 4 classes that semester. I failed 3 of them, and I got a C- in one. I don't know how I managed the C- in
Okay.
sociology. And Vassar was like, yeah, they didn't expel me. They didn't, because they said, obviously something's going on with you.
Right.
But they put me on academic probation, and they threw me out for a semester. They said, don't come back spring semester, take time, be at home, figure your shit out, get your shit together,
Yeah.
and then come back when you're ready. They didn't even say, well, you have to reapply. They looked at my high school transcripts and my application. They were like, okay, clearly this isn't a question of you're not capable of being a student here. This is a
Nice.
question of you're not emotionally ready to be here right now.
Gotcha.
Um, and the thing is, and this is where there's been some tension with my dad over the years. When we got the letter saying don't come back, my dad was furious because he had no idea how irresponsible I had been.
Yeah.
So that was a shock to him. And he was very, very angry at me, and I think his anger at me did not allow him to see that I was suffering emotionally.
Right.
And that was, like the being thrown out for a semester is a symptom of a larger problem.
Right.
And he wasn't able to see that because he was just very, very angry. And I didn't have the vocabulary to say, hey, this is why I think it happened.
Yeah.
Um, and so I took that semester. off, I ended up going and working as a teaching assistant at my old middle school in the drama department, which kind of just
Okay.
felt like, okay. And that was cool because it was like a job, and it was the first time I had a real job. And I was like, oh, this is how I can be useful in the world outside of the context of going to class and doing homework. So I think that was valuable.
Yeah.
I took an English class at a local community college just so that I could be like, okay, I'm still learning, I'm still doing something. I thought that that might help when I kind of petitioned to get back into school.
Right.
But I didn't go to therapy, didn't talk to any therapist, didn't talk to any psychiatrist, none of that, because I didn't know that I should be, and my dad didn't think that I should be. And it wasn't until many years later, not many years later. So, long story short, the lesson I took from being thrown out of college for one semester was get better at faking it.
Mm.
So
Mm.
yeah. And so they let me back in fall of my sophomore year, and I still was probably drinking too much and partying too much, but I was like, okay, but now I know I have to be a little bit more responsible and make sure that I'm not skipping class too often and not, and so I got it together enough that I graduated on time, even though I essentially lost a full year. I graduated with the class that I came in with, which I took summer classes, every summer
Okay.
as well, because I was determined. I was like, I'm gonna graduate with the people I came in with one way or another.
Gotcha.
That was my ego talking mostly, but
I want to highlight something for you
sure, yeah.
before we get too far past it. And I don't know if you've even been able to see this within yourself, but there's something that I'm seeing throughout your story already is the resiliency that you have, even through difficult scenarios. Um, and also, too, just the mindset, even though, and the reason I'm saying this and want to highlight this is because I understand intrinsically what it's like to have bipolar, because I have the same scenario, and it's also generational.
Hmm. Hmm.
I understand it.
Hmm.
Um, and have to take medication as well. So
Yeah.
I know all of it.
Yep. Yep.
Um, but what I want to highlight for you is the fact that even with that difficulty of the school saying you got to take a semester off, and they're not saying you can't come back, they're just saying we see a problem, you need to take time off, go
Mm.
do that. So there's a kind of a slight bit of rejection that takes place with that information,
Yep.
right?
Absolutely. Yep.
And then you go back to California, your dad's upset,
Hmm.
can't understand what's happening. You don't have the verbal capacity to express why you think that it happened or
Hmm.
convey to him, your reasoning. But the interesting part that I want to highlight is the fact that you went ahead and you found an opportunity at the high school to get back into a creative environment
Yeah.
as an assistant.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
As well as the forethought to say, all right, let me take one of these other classes that is not creative, but it's going to be a required course going back to
Hmm.
school. So let me do something there as well to
Hmm.
kind of fill in the blanks
Yeah.
before you go back. So I wanted to highlight that. I don't know if you realized that or recognized it in
No,
that point
it's
in time.
it's funny that you say that. I'm really glad you said it because that makes me feel good that it's that you're seeing it as a sign of resiliency because now I can kind of reframe it in my mind as well. At the time, I at the time I thought these are two things I can do to get out of the house so I'm not near my dad who is very angry at me right now.
Right, sure.
I was like,
Survival.
yeah, exactly. I was like, gotta not be in the house. He's mad. Stay away from the house when he's, like just make sure that my schedule syncs up so that we're not at home at the same time because
Right.
I don't want to keep having the same fight with him. And the thing that came to light years later was my dad had seen some of the worst of my mother's oldest sister in particular. She had untreated
Okay.
bipolar, no
Gotcha.
finding treatment. And so he had an inkling maybe that that was what was going on with me,
All right.
but he never said it. He just was getting kind of almost, I don't want to say it's PTSD. I can't speak for him, but he was just remembering behaviors and behavioral patterns, and he saw that in me and it freaked him out. And the way he
Sure.
dealt with it was to get angry.
Yeah.
And what he didn't do was tell me that there's a family history of bipolar disorder. I
Ah,
had no idea. If I
okay.
had known, then we could have dealt with
Addressed
it
it sooner.
early.
Yeah.
And and then I probably would have gone back to school and not resumed, partying and being depressed and being up and being down and oh my God, I'm going to go out and drink and then I'll kind of,
Right.
my brain will spin down. Well, you know how, like
Yes. Yep.
the kind of maladaptive coping mechanisms that I learned to deal with being bipolar, but also, like I said, I learned how to fake it a little bit better. I was like, okay,
Yeah.
I can't not go to class altogether. I've got to at least try.
Sure.
And I did not find out that there was a family history until I think it was the summer before my senior year of college.
Okay.
And it was one of those things that was just kind of like an, oh, by the way, because one of my mother's other sisters, I found out, had some sort of she had like a psychiatric break. She ended up with psychosis while she was in college studying for her final exam. Something happened. She snapped. She was, it was, this was like in the 70s and in India, and they didn't know what to call it. So they said, okay, you've got schizophrenia, which is
Yeah.
not, in retrospect, probably not what it was. It was bipolar with maybe schizoaffective disorder, something like that. Because
Right.
she was getting paranoid and she thought that a neighbor was stalking her and she was just,
Okay.
she didn't want to leave the house and she couldn't function,
Yeah.
and she ended up institutionalized for what they called schizophrenia.
Okay.
And my dad kind of brought it up in a very, oh, by the way. And I was like, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. Oh, by the
Right.
way,
Yeah.
that's kind of important information that I would have loved to have had. And then I was like, was she the only one in the family? And he was like, oh yeah, no, your mom's oldest sister, like she'd fly into these rages and she'd, like get really, really angry. And then she would just sort of like retreat to her room for a long time. And we didn't know what she was doing or what she was up to. And she was kind of a mess. And I was like, okay, this sort of sounds very, very familiar. And I was like, are you not picking this up? Um, and so I was like, well, great. Okay. Well, and I was like, okay, now I have the information. It would have been nice to have had the information 3 years ago,
Right.
5 years ago, just
Yeah.
to anticipate what might be in store for me. But then I knew, and even then, my dad, and I think this is just because there's still, I mean, it's getting better, but just this stigma that still exists
Oh
around
yeah.
mental illness and medication for mental illness. My dad was just kind of like, his point of view was it can't be that bad because you're not I don't need to put you in an institution, or it can't be that bad because you're not running around screaming at people and breaking shit in the house the way your mom's older sister did. Like
Yeah.
you're not flying into blind rages and you're not, and I was like, yeah, but it's still affecting me and it's still making my life hard. And it's still, like I'm not happy right now. Like I would not describe my feeling about life as happy.
Yeah.
It's a struggle. And I kind of had to push very hard to get him on board with me. I mean, and in the end, also, I went through Vassar's mental health services and I was like, this is what I think is going on with me.
Okay.
They
Cool.
didn't have a psychiatrist, on staff or anything, but they got me in with a therapist and they said we can refer you out to a psychiatrist in the area and they can, do the formal evaluation and determine if you need medication.
Right.
So I went through that whole process and I did it, and they were like, "Yep, this is what you have. You've got the." I remember the psychiatrist was very funny. He was like, you've got bipolar 2, which is the better of the two, and I was like, the
Yes.
better. So I
Right.
was like, he was like, this. She's like, this is a little easier to medicate than the other kind. So
Right.
like thumbs up. Like this is this might be okay. And so, I was very lucky as well. He got me on a cocktail of medications that worked very well. It took a while to get the dosage, to tweak the dosages exactly right, but it wasn't
Okay.
a thing where I had to try 9 different medications in order to find it. Was just we found 3 that seemed to be working, and then it was just kind of a calibration thing.
Yep.
Um, and that was a game. I remember the first day, like he sent me home with like a sample pack of a mood. I'm on lamotrigine, Lamictal, for just
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
stabilization. He sent me home with a sample pack. He was like, "Try this. We'll kind of titrate you up or whatever. See if it works." He's like, "If it seems to be doing something, then we'll kind of look at putting you on it long term. If you're feeling nothing, then we have to try something else." And I remember literally like 2 days after taking the first dose, I had so much energy, not like energy in the crazy manic way, but just in the kind of like I was like, oh wow, I'm like alert and present in the world, and I don't feel like I'm living in a cotton ball. I don't feel like I was like, and this is like spring of my senior year. I was like, oh man, what have I been missing all this time? Like
Right.
all
Right.
of a sudden, I just thought I just had so much, just like I just felt so alert and like present in a
Mm,
way that I hadn't been. And I was like, this is fascinating. And like, yes, this is okay. Clearly, this is working. Let's continue. Um, and so that was a really big turning point, but it was also something that I had to kind of fight to do on my own because my dad was like, I don't think you need a psychiatrist. I don't think it's that bad. I don't think what you're going through is that bad because I've seen really bad shit and you're not
right.
doing that. So I don't see what the problem is. And for a long time also, like I was on medication. He was like, well, don't you ever want to get to a point where you don't need the medication anymore? And I was like, no, 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 you don't understand. I'm on
Yeah.
this for life. This is just what I need to be functional. I can't go off these meds. I go off these meds, it's all gonna go pear-shaped. Like this is not like a temporary disease and then you treat it and it gets better or whatever. This is a chronic health condition. This is an illness. This is not, a character flaw or a head
Correct.
cold or like this is what I have to live with.
Yeah. And for him, his reaction was just because it didn't look the same,
Yep.
then to him it wasn't the same.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, I'm sure there was also a little bit of denial as well. Like,
Sure.
I
Yeah.
I, I don't want to this sounds horrible, the way I'm gonna put it, but I don't want to have a sick daughter.
Well,
Um,
you know, I think that's any parent's
yeah,
mindset, right?
yeah.
And it's not a horrible thought process. It's just it's the way that the parent is. And you want your child to be as successful as possible, as happy as possible, as functional as possible.
Mhm.
It just doesn't always work out that way every
Right,
time, right?
right.
And again, looking at it from the way you've described it being within the family, I'm seeing it from the perspective of he's not seeing it the exact same as what he's experienced it before, which again was at a different place in time
Hmm.
and in a different country
In our
as
country.
well, right? So it's not you don't have all of the added um, information in
Yep,
terms of time frame. You don't
yep,
have all the added support systems in place that
yep,
are able to handle those types of situations.
exactly.
And I know from within our own family that those you just didn't have those resources to be able to handle it,
Yeah. No,
right?
that's
So
true.
you didn't have access to that. You
True.
didn't know what it was, didn't have a name for it,
Yeah.
didn't have medications to go along with it, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Um, and again, understanding what you're saying, and
Mhm.
also seeing it from his perspective too. He's in two different. He's in a different region of the country,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? He's not seeing you every single day
That's
and
true.
how things are going.
Yeah.
So
That's
he
very,
still doesn't have the full picture of what's taking place.
yeah. No, that's very true. Very, very true. Yeah. I mean, he just knew what I was reporting back, and what I
Right.
was seeing. And he was just kind of like, well, it sounds like you're having a bad day. And I was like, but every
Yeah.
day's a bad day.
And you never know how that day is going to come.
Exactly. And I was like, some days are really bad. And then like a good day is like, oh, it's only kind of bad.
Yeah.
Like, that's like my baseline. Like my baseline good day is this is a bad day. And then there are really bad days. So
Yep.
yeah, it's just, and yeah, he just, I mean, that's a fair point. He wasn't seeing it on a day-to-day basis. And then also, I mean, like to your point, also like not just it wasn't just that his experience was, a different time, a different generation, a different country, but also he saw one of his sisters-in-law who was just sent to an institution,
Yep.
and we don't know what medication or whatever she was just sent away. And
Right.
the other sister was not medicated. She was not treated. She just sort of existed in the world and,
Dealt with what she had.
yeah, exactly. And she suffered and she, created suffering for those around her because she didn't have emotional regulation tools.
Right.
So he didn't know what a medicated bipolar person looked like. He was just
Yeah.
kind of like, oh, either you are wreaking havoc in everyone's lives and making your own life crazy, or you're, being sent away because you're just that far gone.
Yeah.
And I didn't fit into either of those paradigms either. So he was just kind of like, well, I don't think you really have it.
Correct. Another thing I want to highlight here for the audience too,
Mhm.
because I think this is a key thing. Um, Along with the resiliency that is still continuing at this point in the way that you're maneuvering through your environment and circumstances, but you stepped into a place of self advocacy.
Mhm.
And I think that as creatives who may or may not experience difficulties and mental struggles and different things like that, you have to be your own advocate and
Mhm. Yeah.
get, finding an answer, finding a solution, finding something that is going to help you move forward. Because many times in the world that we live in currently, if you don't be your own advocate, you're going to get directed in a way that is not always going to be the best. And I
Mhm.
can say that from my own experience of seeing multiple doctors over the course of years, multiple therapists in different modalities over the course of the years,
Mhm.
going to the University of Michigan Depression Center, having them say, I can't help you,
Mhm.
even to those extreme
Yeah.
sounding situations. But still, I was always searching, trying
Mhm.
to find something that was going to work. Even when the medications weren't working, like you're going through that whole trial of, oh, let's try this, let's try that one, let's try
Yeah.
this one. This one's new. How would we see this?
Yeah.
The whole process of that is arduous.
It is. Yeah.
And if you don't become your own advocate to the point of at least trying to continue to search,
Mhm.
a lot of times you'll fall into this place of just existence, which
Mm.
is
Mhm.
almost as miserable
Yeah.
as any of that's everything else around it, right?
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
wanted to highlight that for you as well, that I can recognize that, I can see that. A lot of it is based on my own personal experience,
Right.
but I'm
Right.
recognizing that within your story.
Yeah.
And it's a blessing that the university saw that as well
Hmm.
for you again.
Yeah. It's true.
They
Yeah.
did in your freshman year, said, wait, you need to take some time off.
Hmm.
Now getting towards the end of your college career, they're saying, okay, we see something a little bit more that's going
Hmm.
on here, and let's help you get to a place where you can figure that out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, with coming towards the end of college, having this degree, um, and not really having an idea of how you're going to step into the real world using this degree.
Mhm.
Did you have any thoughts of once you got into the accounting thing of, all right, how can I get back into this creative environment?
Yeah. So the whole thing about the temp job that became the permanent job that became like nearly 20 years of my life. I had when I was in college still, I had done an internship with a small film company in the Hudson
Okay.
Valley. And it was a very, very small company. Basically one woman working on her own with she had a bunch of people who she collaborated with, but it was, she was kind of her own LLC. She was making a documentary. Her wife was a biology professor at Vassar, so that was kind of her connection to the school. So she
Okay.
had like the pipeline. There was a pipeline of
Right. Right.
people who would go and intern for her. And she and I just became really good buddies, and I interned with her through junior and senior year. And initially it was just like your general like production assistant, kind of, filing things and doing research and stuff like that. And then I was interested in learning how to edit. And unfortunately, I got to college just a little too late, so I never learned how to cut film. I wish I had,
Okay.
because that just seems like it would be fun to know how to do. But everybody was using Final Cut Pro back at that point, so she taught me how to use that, and I ended up, doing enough work on that documentary film that she said, when this film comes out, I'm crediting you as an assistant editor, and I was like, oh wow, this is cool.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
Um, and then after college, I continued to work for her throughout that summer. And the main editor on her project was also a former Vassar student. He lived down in Baltimore. He came up. We spent the whole summer. We were trying to jam together a full rough cut of the documentary because we wanted to see if we could get, fundraising and, grants and stuff like that. Unfortunately, it got to a point where um, I needed a job that paid real money. She just was not able to pay me a living wage. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to take a job. I'm signing with a temp agency. I'm going to take a job, but this job is only the job that keeps the roof over my head and pays for the health insurance that I need to take my meds.
Right.
I tell people, it's funny, everyone's like, oh, you're a musician with a day job. I was like, I don't even think of it as my day job. It's my health insurance job.
Yes.
I need the health insurance. I need the medication. What I'll go live in my car if I have to, but I need the drugs. Like, you know.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, I need income. I had a roommate, but it was always the idea was always this is the job that keeps the roof over my head and pays for the prescriptions, and I'm going to primarily find my goal was to work as like a freelance editor, um and then just have like the day job to bring in the income to keep the roof over my head. The thing about being and this is the case for a lot of creatives, as I'm sure you know, and this is something that I, to this day now in my the version of myself that's a musician now.
Yeah.
um uh it's very very it's very gig to gig when
Sure.
you're working freelance, and some people really really thrive in that sort of environment, that energy. They're good, they have that hustle, they know how to find work, they know how to get the work and network and all that. I'm
Yeah.
terrible at it. I was just not good at it, and I was not, I got little projects here and there thrown at me, nothing consistent enough that I was able to build a real. And then also just like I just don't have the personality to be out there hustling for work all the time.
Yeah.
And so I was like, you know, um, I don't want to give up on the dream of being a creative, but maybe I need to recalibrate and just be somebody who's okay. Because I had a weird aptitude for accounting, which is bizarre because I was terrible at math when I was in school. I was like, what the heck, but accounting is accounting has rules that are kind of easy and structured. And once you know the rules and you know a
Yeah.
little bit about how to use Microsoft Excel, and then that does all the math for you. So I was like, okay, that's not what I would have thought, where I would end up. So I was like, okay, then, like I need the job because I need the roof over my head. I need food. I need my medication, in order to just be a human being in the world.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that I don't like art. It doesn't mean that I don't care about film. It doesn't mean that I'm not a creative person, but that's going to be like the side hustle. Or even not even a hustle. That's just going to be like, little passion projects or whatever. That's kind of how I
Sure.
looked at just how I looked at the relationship between just like the reality of my life and the part of myself that was a creative. And that worked for a while. And
Okay.
I stayed for 4 years at the resort in the Hudson Valley, and then I started working in New York City. And just very, 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 everything about the stereotypical New York City rat race, corporate lifestyle. That was, I did that for a good 10 years. And then I burned out hard because that's just a tough. I never moved to the city because it's very expensive.
Right.
So I commuted, like so many people do commute. The commute is rough. Then you commute, it's an hour in on the train. At least I didn't have to drive. And then, you work your 8-hour day, you turn around, you get on the train, an hour back home. I would get home at 7 o'clock at night. I'd be exhausted. I'd sit down. I wouldn't want to get back up. And, not really a lot of room for a social life, not really a lot of room for, exercise, not really a lot of room for really any, I mean, like for the 10 years that I had that New York City corporate existence, my only friend was my roommate.
Wow. Okay.
He was
Yeah.
like my primary social, not that, I mean, not my only friend, but he was the only person who was, yeah, like consistently, like he was my community. That was it. It was like
Yeah.
me and him, that we were like this weird, like, he very brother and sister kind of dynamic, but it was just, that was our existence. And I burned out hard in, what was it, 2015. Um, and I was in a very toxic job at that point, and
Okay.
very, very toxic work environment. My manager was just a very miserable human being and just not easy to work with. And it was one of those things where I just would wake up in the morning and dread going to work. And Sunday would roll around and I'd be like low key depressed all day Sunday because I'm like, oh, tomorrow's Monday. I have to go in there again.
Yeah.
And so I ended up parting ways with that job because I realized that it was not good for my mental health.
Okay.
And then I was trying to figure out what to do in the meantime. And that was right around the time where the story of me wanting to play the bass like Paul McCartney comes back into my story.
All right.
Like, well, while I figure out my next step, I got all this time. I think I'm going to finally take bass lessons. And so I bought a cheap bass from a music school, or from a music store. My roommate came with me and we were just like, what do we get? I don't know. That one costs $100. Sure.
Right.
And we were living in this town in the Hudson Valley called Beacon. And it's an artist town. Just a very it's getting gentrified in a way. Everything's getting gentrified. But it was still, like a lot of creatives, musicians and visual artists and writers and filmmakers. And so we lived there. There was a music school. There is a music school in Beacon called Beacon Music Factory. And
Okay.
I started taking lessons there. And one of the cool things that school offers is um, it's called like a rock band boot camp. It's a little bit like the School of Rock sort of
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah.
format. Um, 12 weeks you sign up for a boot camp and you learn a set of songs and then you would get to perform that set at a music venue in town, which was like the cool part. That's like the reward at the end. And it was things like, it would be something like, oh, we're going to learn how to play Bruce Springsteen's Born to Run end to end, and that's going to be the show. Or it would be like a theme, like let's learn all of the songs from Footloose or something. I don't know, like Blues Brothers, and that's what we'll. And what was really amazing about that experience was twofold. Number one, the best way to get good at playing an instrument like a bass, which is not a solo instrument the way a piano can be, is
Yeah.
you got to play with other people. You've got to be around other people. And in being around and that school, it was a school for all ages. So there was kids who would take music classes there, but then there were a lot of adults like me who were kind of like, I've always wanted to learn how to play the guitar. I've always wanted to learn how to play the drums or the bass or whatever. And here's an opportunity. Um, Through those boot camps, I found the choir experience again and the orchestra
Nice.
experience again. That's where I finally found my people. And it took, we left Chicago when I was 9, and I found this school when I was 31. So it took that long for me to find that
Again.
again, but I
Yeah.
found, and that was huge. That was absolutely huge. Every single meaningful friendship in my adult life is somebody I have met either because I did a class with them at Beacon Music Factory, or I met them in some context because we were at a venue to see another Beacon Music Factory show, or there's just a musician in town who would, come to the shows and be supportive or whatever. And that's where I found my people. And it was amazing. And then as I was trying to figure out what do I do with my life now, I ended up working there for a couple of years. The guy who ran the school was a musician, great musician, great teacher, had a lot of really cool ideas for classes, did not have a head for business. And here I come in and I have all these years of accounting experience. And he was like, you know money.
Yeah.
Help me, help me write a budget. Help me, figure out how to, keep things viable, because he's like, it's a small business in a small town. He's like, I'm just kind of keeping everything together with, tape and a prayer. And so
Right.
I said, yes, of course, I'd love to, I'd love to be a part of, this school has been so important to me in terms of my own, like finding my own musical voice and also finding my own place in the world and my
Right.
people and my community. I was like, yeah, of course I'll help you, So for a good 2 years, I was the business manager, operations man. We never really came up with an official title for me. I kept the trains running.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and the sad thing is he wasn't able to pay me enough for what I ended up, the amount of work I ended up taking on. uh,
Right.
because it was supposed to be like a part-time 15-hour a week job, but I loved it so much that I was working 40 hours a week because I just wanted to. And then
Yeah.
it got to a point where I was like, okay, I'm not really making, and he paid me, and then he also would pay, he would like comp me. He'd be like, you don't have to be any lessons you want to take, music lessons, like you don't have to pay for music lessons. They're on the house. If you want to sign up for another boot camp, you don't have to pay the tuition for the boot camp. It's on the house. And it was like, I mean, and that helped a little bit, but I can't pay my rent in Brazil.
Exactly.
Um, and so it got to a point where, it was a very, very like hard and heartbreaking conversation, but I was just kind of like, look, if you aren't able to, and I did some math. I was like, look, this is the value that I see that I'm bringing to the school. And I'm sure if you talk to the other teachers who work here, they'll attest to that. And, you know, um, but if you're not able to pay me a more or less living wage for 40 hours a week, I have to scale back down to our original agreement, which was 15.
Yeah.
Um, and he was fine with that in theory. In practice, it was dramatic. It was a very dramatic change in terms of how much I was involved versus how much I
Yeah.
scaled back. And it just it didn't end up working out. And on top of that, this coincides with what I was saying at the beginning, with my boyfriend moving in with me and a bunch of unprocessed, and then also just, even learning how to play the bass after all of those years of wanting to be a bass player, because my mom introduced me to the Beatles, and Paul was her favorite Beatle, and Paul plays the bass. There's already a lot of kind of like strange sort of grief adjacent feelings that would bubble up every time I would play the
Right.
bass.
Yeah, I
Uh,
can imagine.
and then, and then Tim moves in with me, and the job that I loved, I'm having to scale back on because I can't afford. I was like, I'll still do it part time, but I need to find another part time job because I need to be able to. Um, and so all of that stuff compounded on top of each other, on top of each other, on top of each other, and that's when the the bottom dropped out for me in terms of my ability to manage my, up until that point, very well managed bipolar disorder, and something just completely, it, all of those things. I'm sorry, my microphone is beeping at me. Can you hear me okay? Or
Yeah, yeah.
okay, all right. This happens every day at 4 o'clock. I don't know why. As long as you can hear me, that's fine. It's just going to, I might flinch because it's just making a weird noise. Um, anyway, yeah, just to all of that kind of came together in a way that was just, it was just a lot of, like, here's a good thing. My relationship is going really well, but here's a job I love and I'm not able to do it as as fully as I want to be able to do it because it's just not financially realistic anymore. Um,
Yeah.
and also, I'm getting fairly serious at learning to play this instrument that I've always wanted to play. That was, a source of a lot of very deep memories of my mother, but also a source of a lot of memories of a lot of arguments that she and I used to have over, like, why aren't you practicing the piano? Why aren't you taking that seriously? Why, like, why aren't you doing what like, why aren't you, we're paying to put you in those lessons and you're not taking seriously? And I was like, because I don't want to play the piano. I want to play the bass. And she's like, we're not going to put you in bass lessons. I don't know why, but, just a lot of weird kind of, and just like this weird mix of like complicated, you know, like happy and sad and just, thorny, and then just and grief. And it was grief over the job, it was grief over my mom.
Yeah.
And it was also on top of that, then it turned into grief that I was in this moment where I was, in a relationship and it was going well and we were going to form a life together. We were making the choice to have a life together. And
Hmm.
I was not able to be the kind of partner I wanted to be right as we were making that choice together because I was dealing with all this other shit that was swirling around in my head that I was not able to handle. Um,
Right. So basically, what I'm seeing take place at this point in time is just the dam breaking on all of those emotions
yeah,
and all that grief
yeah,
that had kind of been there, but never probably fully processed
yeah,
or worked through.
yeah,
Um,
exactly. Yeah, yeah,
so it's creating a kind of like a break
yes, yeah,
within the mental state at this point, the mental stability that you had built up.
yeah, exactly, exactly. And there was a lot of along with the sort of mental distress I was going through, there was also a part of me that was like mad at myself because up until that point I had been managing my
Sure.
condition
Yes.
very, very well. And then it was all falling apart. And I was like, I was angry at myself. Like it wasn't my fault, but it felt like it was my fault. I was like, what am I doing? What did I do wrong? What did I break? What did I something,
Yeah.
what should I have been doing differently that, like that could prevented this from happening? And, there's there, the answer is nothing, like
Right.
that's it's chemistry and circumstance and
Exactly.
and not learning, not dealing with the shit that I should have dealt with 30 years ago, 20 years ago. But the 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 like the sick paradox too of like the way it compounds on itself is like, okay, I'm not in a good way. I'm angry at myself for not being in a good way because I feel like I could have prevented this if I had done X, Y, and Z differently. I'm
Hmm.
also feeling angry at myself because I should be happy right now, but instead I'm not happy and I'm being a really shitty partner to this person who I love. I'm also really angry because I need to find another job. And I don't know if I'm able to find another job because I'm not like mentally in, like in a place where I think I can do a job well. I had a really good psychiatrist. He was like, we'll figure something out. I got you, but now we were back in the cycle of, okay, there was 3 medications I was taking that were working very well. And he's like, okay, now we might have to play a little, musical chairs and see if you need
Right.
something else. Trying other medications, some of which made it worse. That's
Yep.
the thing is sometimes it makes it worse before, and then okay, that's clearly that one. Stop with that one. Try
Yep.
this one, just experimenting with all this stuff and just like the sort of the chaos around that. And and then it just compounds. It just becomes a vicious circle of like, okay, this is just not getting better. This is not getting better. And it's not getting better. I don't know if you can relate to this necessarily, but the way I looked at it was it's not getting better and it must be my fault that it's not getting better.
Oh,
And
sure.
yeah, yeah. So it's like, okay, it's not getting better. It's getting worse. It's all my fault. Everything is my fault. I can't find a job that I love. I can't find a job that works for me. Or like I was able to find a job eventually, but it was a job again, working in New York City, doing the commute. I was like, I on purpose didn't want to do this anymore
Yeah.
because it wasn't allowing me to serve the more creative part of my personality, and it didn't leave me room for that. But I have to have a job. So it's like, okay, I'm depressed, I'm angry, I'm not in a good way. I feel like my personal life is falling apart. I feel like, I'm playing whack-a-mole with medications now, and I'm going back to a lifestyle, a working lifestyle that I very consciously walked away from.
Yeah.
But I have no choice because I need the health insurance.
Yeah.
And so it was just like I felt like I was failing at everything. And I was like, I'm no good to anybody right now. I'm not being a good girlfriend, I'm not being a good partner. I'm not a particularly good employee right now. I'm not really taking care of myself, in terms of basic, like, I'm not eating enough, I'm not sleeping enough, I'm not, and then that's, something that's outside of my control at that point. Um, and
And
now,
for the audience too, this is a key thing to highlight because when we as people that have bipolar 2, when we hit those places, and I call them speed bumps at this point because essentially that's what they are. Uh,
mhm,
the mind is not allowing us to think clearly and cohesively
mhm,
as we have when we're in the really stable points in time.
yeah,
So the mind is trying to take everything that's coming up emotionally,
yeah,
right? And it's trying to rationalize things and it's trying to do what it does to try and protect you, but sometimes it slips into this self-criticism
yeah,
voice
yeah,
that's beating you up
yeah,
for getting to this place, being your own advocate, getting to this place of stabilization, and then now you're back in another place of dis-ease again, right?
mhm,
The body's in dis-ease.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and the mind is trying to rationalize that, but it's not doing what it needs to do because it's having to fight against emotions.
yeah,
The mind and emotions are two completely different operating systems.
yep, 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 yep,
And
exactly,
so
exactly.
what I want the creative community and creative audience to see here is that this is a place where you have to give yourself some grace,
Hmm.
which does not come easy, and it's
No,
not the first thing that you think of.
no,
It's
no,
probably about 15, 20, 30 steps down the list of things
yeah,
that you're trying to think of. But you need to move that up to at least the top 10
hmm,
things that you're worrying about
yeah,
and give yourself some grace when you're experiencing this type of situation because you personally, Reeya, We've
Mm-hmm.
already established you have resilience within yourself. You have that ability to be your own advocate. And
Mm-hmm.
you've exemplified that across your whole storyline so far.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the things that allow you to be able to move and navigate. Another thing I wanted to highlight too, in terms of being your own advocate, is you recognized your value within that job,
Mm.
which
Yeah.
many creatives always struggle with value in
Mm-hmm.
terms of what they do, how they get paid, how much they get paid, and how much they give out energetically
Mm-hmm.
to somebody else in that environment, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you recognizing that you had a value that was overextended
Mm-hmm.
and you needed to course correct that so that you could, number one, take care of yourself. Number two, not be so drained and be giving and giving and giving and it just not being validated through some monetary uh,
Mm-hmm.
uh, provision. So again, another place where you are advocating for yourself and you recognize, wait a second, I'm doing way more than what my value
Mm-hmm.
calculation is in this environment.
Yeah.
So I want to highlight that for you and then highlight the situation for the audience.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so as you're starting to work with these new medication options and working with your psychiatrist to try and figure out how to get to another place of stability again,
Mm-hmm.
what takes place that allows you to move in that direction?
Um, it took a lot. We never really were able to zero in on anything additional
Okay.
medication wise that would help. What ended up kind of helping was I had been on Ambien CR forever because I have this just sleep issues.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I've got we'll give
Same
you all
here.
a nice primer on some medications here. So I've got Lamictal, which is a mood stabilizer. Got Seroquel, which is originally meant to be, it's an anti-epileptic, but it's also an antipsychotic, which sounds terrifying when you say that out loud, but it's the but that's the medication that allows your brain to spin down. So that's
Yeah.
the stabilizers for the depression, the Seroquel's for the mania.
Yeah.
And then the one thing that I always struggled with was my brain would spin down, but I would never be able to shut the whole power system down and sleep.
Yeah.
So the Ambien was supposed to be for that. The Ambien, my psychiatrist hates Ambien. Don't blame him. Ambien's not the best medication out there, but I came to him from a doctor who had been prescribing that to me for ages. So he was like, well, if it's working for you, that's fine.
Yeah.
Finally got to a point where he was like, let's take you off the Ambien. And he's like, I'm going to give you Klonopin, which is a benzo, which people have some complicated feelings about that class of drugs. But he's like, this might help two things. It might help you sleep, but it also might help with, the anxiety that,
Yeah.
has come up as a result of like just the distress you're in while you're trying to figure out all this other stuff. He's like, let's numb that a little bit and
Right.
see if that can help. And it did. Um, it wasn't the magic bullet that I think, well, he's a psychiatrist. He knows that things aren't magic bullets. I wanted it to be a magic bullet, but it wasn't. Um, but it definitely was better for me than the Ambien. And I did not become a benzo addict or anything like that, so that was good. Um, but the core issues were still just this unprocessed grief that I had not dealt with. So
Yeah.
there's only so much the medication can do. And the medication was keep allowing me to sleep, allowing me to wake up in the morning and go get on the horrible train and go to the horrible job and live my horrible day and then come home and feel horrible. Like you're saying horrible the whole time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Still all felt horrible. It was keeping me functional, but it was still, I just felt horrible all the time. And I started to have, like I would be waiting on the subway platform to get to go back to the Grand Central, the commuter rail. And I would just, again, these very intrusive thoughts of like, well, it would, I could just jump and then I wouldn't have to deal with this anymore.
Yeah.
Or, I'd get home on the commuter rail and I'd be pulling out of the parking lot and I was like, I know exactly where I could drive onto the tracks. And then it's almost like it's very passive the way I was thinking about it too. It's like I'm just gonna let it happen to me. I'm just gonna, oh no, and then I won't have to feel this way anymore.
Yeah.
And then what ended up happening was late in 2019, I was having a really, really, really bad night, and I got into a pretty bad argument with Tim. I don't even remember what it was about. It was probably about something stupid, but it was just, or it might have just been I was feeling horrible and I was just lashing out because I was feeling horrible. And
Yeah.
the perverse thing too about, when you're feeling horrible and you lash out, you know that you're making the other person feel horrible, and then you feel horrible for doing that, and then that
Right.
makes you feel more horrible about yourself, and then and then that compounds, and then you're just gonna lash out more, and you're just gonna lash out more because you're just kind of like, well, I'm just fucking ruining my life, and I'm ruining everyone else's life. So, um, I don't know what I said, but I said something. I think it was all of those medications that my psychiatrist had tried me on and hadn't worked. They were still sitting in my medicine cabinet, and I said something like, "What if there's like 3 or 4 full bottles, 30 days worth of those extra drugs that didn't work on me." I was like, I think I said something like I could just take them all, and then and I said to Tim, I was like, it would make your life a hell of a lot easier if I just went and just took them all and just got myself out of the equation, and you could move on and have a better life
Yeah.
without dealing with me. And he panicked, rightfully so, I would say. In
Sure.
the moment, I was really mad in the moment because he called 911. He was like, "That's you saying that you're planning on,"
Okay. Yeah.
um, and I was, and that's a whole thing. Then they come and I'm freaking out. I'm mad at him for calling 911 because he thwarted my brilliant plan
Right.
to, fix everything, which is not a brilliant plan. But when you're in that headspace, your brain is not, like you said, you've got your mind and you got the emotions, and
Hmm.
you're not thinking in a coherent way. You're thinking of like, what is the easiest way to make this stop?
Yes. Exactly.
And he ruined my plan to make it all stop. So I was like, what the, and then that's the whole thing. They come and they evaluate you, and then they strap you to a gurney, and they tie your arms and legs down, even if you're not necessarily, or you're not hurting yourself or anybody in that moment. They tie you down, which is a whole thing.
Yep.
And I spent the night in the psych ward at the Orange Regional Hospital. They had a social worker come and talk to me. They had another, I think, social worker, a therapist, and then finally they had a psychiatrist on call. This is like the middle of the night. And they got, the phone number of my psychiatrist. And they said, okay, obviously this is an emergency. We're going to call him.
Yeah.
And they kept me there overnight, and I don't remember what they gave me, but they medicated me to a point where I was okay.
Calmed you down.
Yeah, exactly. And they were like, and then they talked to me a whole bunch more. Lots of, just a lot of evaluating. And they're like, okay, we think that you're okay. We will send you home. Your boyfriend's here. We'll send you home. Um, we have talked to your psychiatrist. And so we're sending you home, and he will be calling you. This is not an if. He's like,
Yes.
he will be calling you, and you will pick up the phone when he calls. This
Right.
is, and at that point, having gone through that, and being tied down to a gurney, and man, you'd be in the room and they give you the socks with the rubber soles on them, and then being medicated to a point where you're just all of a sudden it's like, okay. Then I was just like, I was like, what? I remember driving home. Tim was driving me home, and I was just like, I felt like what I had done by verbalizing that was worse. This is still, my mind's still kind of broken. I
Yeah.
was like, by verbalizing it and putting myself in this situation where now they're going to make me get treatment, that's worse. And I shouldn't have said anything. I should have just did it, but done it. That was still where my mind was at. I wasn't going to go home. I mean, they're watching me like a hawk at this point, but
Yeah. Yeah.
that's kind of still where my brain was. I was like, I shouldn't have said anything. I I,
Hmm.
I shouldn't have said anything. And I got home, and my psychiatrist called me because, as he said he would, and he was like, this is a do not pass go, to not collect $200. I am referring you out to um a facility. It's called Silver Hill Hospital in New Canaan, Connecticut. He's like, they have an intensive outpatient dialectical behavioral therapy program.
Okay.
8 weeks. He goes, you have no choice. I'm telling you, you have no choice. It meets 3 times a week. You're gonna have to quit your job to do it. But I'm sorry, like this, you have no choice. This is, he's like, and obviously I'll keep working with you. I had a therapist also that I was seeing, he was like, you'll stay with your current therapist. I will keep working with you on your medication, but you have to go and do this program. Because he said this facility is the best facility in the country as far as I'm concerned. If I had a family member who was, in a bad way, was suicidal, this is where I would send them. So he's like, this is not just, I opened the phone book and pointed at something and that's where you're ending up. Um, and so I quit my job, and I got, you know, I went there. I did a full intake appointment with them. They said, yep, you are a great candidate for this program. Um, and This is early 2020, just to give you an example of where we are in
Oh,
the
wow.
timeline of the world, right?
Yes.
So, yeah, 8 weeks. So early February of 2020 is when I started this program.
Mm.
Uh, it was a game changer, I will say. Dialectical behavioral therapy, I've never experienced it before. It's a very different modality of therapy than I've ever experienced before. It's
Right.
very, there was homework, like I kind of, at first I was like, what the heck? They're giving me a textbook? What am I doing here?
Yeah.
Um, but it's a really interesting way to, it's not just, and then I was continuing with my individual therapy, which is a little bit more of the traditional talk therapy kind of thing too.
Yeah.
So I was getting that, but dialectical behavioral therapy it's like skills based. It's about
Right.
like, recognize that you're dysregulated right now. Learn distress tolerance. Learn, here's some concrete things that you can do when you can say, oh, I'm feeling like I'm going off the edge right now. Here's some few discrete, mindfulness. Looking at the situation from a different way, learning how to communicate problems that you're having in a specific way so that you're not like causing more conflict. And
Right.
one of the things that really struck me was like, I forget there's the wise mind. I don't know. There's your emotional mind, and then there's a rational
Yes.
mind, and then there's the wise mind, which is the fusion of the two. And that's what you got to work towards, is figuring
Yeah.
out how to honor those two sides of your mind, and then moving forward. And that way it was really, really amazing. And it was a group therapy environment as well. And the way it was set up was, everybody would come in and out. So people would be cycling in and out, depending on where they were in their 8 weeks or whatever. And it was really cool to be there when people were graduating, so to speak, because, you would see, and everybody would, we kind of give everybody a fond farewell or whatever. And then they would talk about what they, and it was, especially just very moving to hear from people who are like, I came in here and I was a fucking mess, and I'm leaving here and I feel like I'm in a good place. Like my very first day at that program was somebody else's graduation day. And I
Yeah.
was kind of like, what have I gotten into here? And then it was kind of like, okay, we're saying goodbye to, I can't remember her name. I was, just one day with her.
Sure.
But um And, everybody who'd kind of been there and had, kind of seen her work through her stuff, they were, I'm just kind of like, oh, wow, okay, so this works for people. So I'm gonna, not that I wasn't gonna give it a fair shot, but I just didn't understand. I mean, the whole modality of the way it worked, I was like, this doesn't feel like therapy. This feels like I'm going to class and I've got a textbook and I've got some homework to do. And
Yeah.
and I was like, okay, well, it's clearly working for people. And it was just, as we cycled through seeing people graduate, again, it was just very, very validating. And then also seeing people come in, and people come in who are in a great deal of distress, and that's why they're coming in, and being able to, like halfway through the program, some people are coming in and they're just kind of like, oh my God, what am I doing here? I'm a mess. I've been told that this is where I need to be.
Right.
And then, being halfway through the program and already feeling like things had changed, and being in that group therapy environment where we're all kind of sharing, and, being told by some of the new people in the group that, like, oh, wow, like hearing what you're saying now, and you're like, 4 weeks into your 8 weeks, it looks like you've made huge, great strides. And that makes me feel like, okay, I'm in the right place as well. If I can, so there's something kind of about the way a program is structured, not just the DBT, but also just the group dynamic of it. It's
Yes.
like you kind of learn from each other in that way, and you can kind of, so it's not just you've got, a therapist or a social worker kind of talking you through things. It's you're bouncing all of it off of everybody, and you're seeing everybody at different stages of their growth, which is really, really impactful. I am
Correct.
so lucky that my last day, my graduation day, was 4 days before everything got locked down for COVID. I
Oh,
don't
wow.
really know. It was just dumb luck. I don't know how that program, I mean, I'm sure they tried to do it remotely over Zoom or whatever. I can't imagine if, I don't know how effective that would be in a remote
Right.
environment. I think it's hard. I mean, but it was unprecedented time in history. So, everyone tried to figure out what to do.
Yeah.
I consider myself lucky that I got through it so that I could do the whole thing in person. And it was a game changer, in terms of my ability to just self-regulate. That said, I will not say that it was a permanent cure. Healing
Sure.
isn't linear, and sometimes I still had bad days, and sometimes things, set me off, and so I won't say that DBT cured me and that program cured me, but it gave me a set of tools that I didn't have before. And I have access to those tools. Sometimes I don't always remember the tools that are there. Sometimes it's,
Sure.
you
Yeah.
gotta, if I'm really in about, oh my God, I still have it here. I'm going to show you. They gave us it looks like a little credit card, and it's got all the, like, the core DBT, like, techniques.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
And it was almost like, I don't want to say it was a joke, kind of, but it was like, they were like, oh, hey, if you want to keep this in your wallet. And I was like, yeah, I want to keep this. So it's like mindfulness, wise mind observe, like emotional regulation, distress tolerance, stop, pros and cons, if you're feeling freaked out, go splash cold water on your, like, just, it's just a way to, like, all of these different tools that you can take to just interrupt the bad, if you feel like you're spinning out, there's like so many different ways where you can kind of interrupt that cycle. And once you're able to interrupt the cycle, then you can take a step back and be like, okay, breathe. All right, okay, this
Yeah.
is this is not the catastrophe that it feels like it is. So having that toolkit is super, super helpful. But it's, then there's still always things that will cause difficulties. I mean, lockdown was hard.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
Yeah. And then as things started to open up, I mean, um, I had been, while I was, it's like I said, I quit my job to do that DBT program, and then I kind of took a part-time job, where my boyfriend worked, just so that
Okay.
because the program meant Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, and so on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I would go in and I was just like doing accounts payable, like little filing and stuff
Okay.
like that. And I was at a hotel, in New York City. All hotels obviously closed because of COVID. So he lost his job. I lost my little part-time job. And then as things started to open up, um, so many hotels, and so Tim works in hospitality. He's been working in hospitality finance his whole career. So
Okay.
many hotels. I want to say the statistic is 20% of the hotels in New York City that closed due to COVID never reopened. So
Oh,
now
wow.
the competition for roles, for jobs in that sector, so much higher because you've got
Yeah.
all these people who lost their jobs, they're trying to come back, and there's 20% less hotels for it. So we ended up having to kind of expand our job search parameters, and we moved 2 hours upstate from where we had been living in the Hudson Valley. And that was very, very hard on me. This is the summer of 2021. And that was hard on me. It's only 2 hours away, right? But it was 2 hours, and it was pulling me away from that community, the
Yeah.
music community. And so again, it's like a reenactment of
Yeah.
being pulled away from the Quaker school or being pulled away from the choir. It was like just another version of that. And that was really, really hard on me. And I visited, it's only 2 hours, 2 hours by car. It wasn't the end of the world. And then, I've got really close friends down in Brooklyn. That's a 4 hour drive. That's a little bit more intense, but still not the end of the world. I did my best to stay, involved. Um, it's not the same. It wasn't the same.
Sure.
It was a
No.
very, very difficult 2 years for me. And where we were living is a very beautiful part of New York State. It's closer to it's where Tim was working was actually in southern Vermont.
Okay.
The town we were living in is closer to Vermont than it is to any place in New York State. It's about like at the midpoint between Bennington, Vermont, and Saratoga Springs, New York.
Gotcha.
We were 20 minutes from the Vermont border. Very, very beautiful part of the state, but very bucolic and rural and small town. And I grew up in San Francisco, and I had been working in Manhattan, and I've been living in the Hudson Valley, which is, basically an extension of the New York City metropolitan area. This was talk about culture shock. This was a lot of culture shock. It's also a very, very white part of the state and a
Mm.
very, very Republican part of the state. And so I was just like, very much not, I'm a very
Outsider.
thankful
Yeah.
minority here. Yep. Um, I got it. I was at the same time, I got a job where I was able to work from home. That was my first work from home job, and I loved it. And I hope to never work in an office again because
Right.
it's amazing.
Yeah.
So there was, and that was a good job. So it wasn't all gloom and doom and terribleness. And um, but what was funny was along the way during lockdown, I had started working on my first album of original
Okay.
music. And I was working on it with this guy that I was, we'd been kind of, met through friends of friends, and I'd never written original music before. And he'd, done a little bit of that, but he'd never really composed a whole album of music. So we kind of took a chance on each other. We met over email and Zoom. We never met in person.
Okay.
Um, and I was like, I just had this very profound experience doing this DBT program after a very, very hard period of my life that was due to a lot of really hard things that I went through in my childhood.
Yeah.
And I think I have a little story to tell in there, and I feel like I want to do it musically. And I feel like I'm at a point where I want to try writing original music, and it'll either suck or it'll be fine. I don't know. And he was like, "Hey, I want to help you with that." And so we worked on this album completely remotely during lockdown. We didn't know if venues would ever open up again. We were just like, let's make this album and put it out in the world and see what happens. And then, of course, right as the album was about to come out, we moved further upstate, and venues started to open up again. So I was like, oh no, like it's just, to promote an album from 4 hours away from where my target audience is, kind of challenging. venues are opening up. I was like, well, if venues are opening up, I want to play this music live. So grab some of my music friends from the Hudson Valley and then try to come up with a rehearsal schedule and drive back and forth for that. And it
Right.
was a lot of craziness. But it was anchoring for me because I was so very unhappy living there, and having that album come out, and having, like doing some promotion around it, and playing some shows and stuff like that, and which allowed me to kind of reconnect to my community
Sure.
in the Hudson Valley. That was good. It didn't fix the kind of bigger problem, which is that I was, there's no amount of, you know, live shows that you can play
Right.
make up for the fact that at the end of the day, I go home to a house that I hate in a town that I hate,
Yeah. Yeah.
and where I'm just profoundly unhappy. I wake up in the morning, I just don't like where I am. And that was another, like you said, speed bump, a bit of a speed bump, while especially at first when we moved there. And again, it wasn't catastrophic because I had this toolkit that I didn't have before.
Yeah.
But it was, one moment. My cat, he's a Siamese cat and he is noisy and he has decided that he does not want to be in the room anymore. So if you don't mind. Yeah, so I had the toolkit, so it never got to a point where they needed to go to a hospital or anything like that. But it was, I was deeply unhappy, and it took me, and then, again, we had another, this is a very random thing that happened after that. Was the the job that Tim was in ended up becoming, a bit toxic. He was working for a resort up in southern Vermont, and there was a management change. The management company
Oh,
got bought out by another one, and the company culture turned overnight into something that was just not workable for him, and he was miserable. And so he started job hunting, and he got a job opportunity down in northern Georgia, right on the border between northern Georgia and Chattanooga, Tennessee.
okay.
And we talked about it for a long time about whether this made sense or not. And it was, I'm portable because I work from home.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, I don't know. And in the meantime, alongside all this, um, that first album had come out. And, it went well. We released it in January of 2022, which was, the dead of winter during the, Omicron, variant of COVID.
Yeah.
It's a weird time to put out an album, but it got a little bit of attention. I got some radio play up in upstate New York and stuff like that, so that was cool. So Luke, my collaborator on the album, we started working on the next one, the one that just came out this past August, and this past 3 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago. This year's been wild. So we had been working on that album for 2 years and had recorded most of it, and then this thing happened with Tim's job, and all of a sudden it was like, what are we gonna do? Because there are no jobs nearby, but there's this job that feels too good to pass up, and it would
Right.
require a huge move and a huge sacrifice. And I was like, and Tim was like, it doesn't have to be permanent. It does not have to be permanent. You can go down there 2 years, whatever, reset, do a little bit of a career reset, and then, come back. Because I like, all of his kids are up in like that. It was, it wasn't just friends and family, it was also family that we'd be leave behind. So I was like, okay.
Sure.
Um, it's funny. So yeah, all of 2024, we lived in Chattanooga, Tennessee.
Okay.
After 20 years in New York, various parts of New York. But yeah, um, massive culture shock.
For sure.
Massive, massive culture shock. But the funny thing was, Chattanooga is a city, and where we were living in upstate New York was not a city. So I was like,
Right.
oh my God, I can get Thai food. I can, like,
Yes.
there's restaurants and stuff to do and museums and there's an aquarium and there's like, nightlife and there's,
Yeah.
all these, and I became I started running when we were still in upstate New York, kind of because I was like, I gotta do something.
Yeah.
And there's all these, like, Chattanooga is a great city for runners. There's all these trails and you can run along Tennessee River. And I was like, okay, I have no music life here whatsoever. There's no music community that I'm a part of, and that's a bummer. But we had finished recording the album, this album. So I was like, okay, and Luke and I were working on how to, and we'd done it before because we did it during the pandemic. He was like, we've done this before, long distance mixing and collaborating and
Yeah.
figuring out how to get the album ready. Let's do that again. And so, that was the extent of what I was doing musically. I wasn't playing shows. I had all my musical instruments with me. I wasn't really practicing any of them. Wasn't playing the bass. I wasn't,
Yeah.
um, so I didn't have that creative outlet
Okay.
there for me last year. So I just got really good at running. Um, which is, of all the things to, at least I wasn't, taking heroin or anything like that. I mean, like,
Sure.
a fairly healthy substitute, um, but I lacked balance. And again, it was sort of that similar situation of, you graduate from college, you've got the film degree, you don't know what to do with the degree. Okay, I got to do
Right.
something else.
Yeah.
And there were moments when we were living there last year, and I didn't know how much longer. I didn't know. I mean, we didn't intend on leaving as fast as we did. And I was like, if this is going to be where I am for the next 2 to 3 years, um, that's a bummer because it'll feel a little bit like music has become a side hustle for me and not my main calling.
Sure.
Again,
Yeah. Yeah.
it'll feel like, with me putting the film editing aside. And I, had kind of messy feelings about that as well.
Sure.
Um, and then basically what happened was a combination of the culture shock got to be a little bit too much, especially after the last election.
Yeah.
Chattanooga is a fairly progressive city as southern cities go, but we're very, very close to a kind of scary part of Georgia.
Gotcha.
And it was the crazies kind of started. It started to feel a little bit scary down there,
Sure.
especially.
Culturally, things were shifting.
Yeah, yeah. And it's one of those, and Tim's a white guy, and he was like, I don't feel particularly safe here. And if I don't feel safe, then you probably really don't feel safe. So let's go back. Our goal was to get anywhere back to the Northeast. We got very lucky. He found a job in New Jersey,
Okay.
about a stone's throw from where we used to live in New York. So we got dumb lucky. So we moved back to the New York area in February of this year. And that timed out really well because I was like, oh, it's time to promote the new album. And now I'm finally back and all of my people are here and this is going to work out really well. So I have this very strange 1 year in Chattanooga in my arsenal of places where I've lived.
Uh-huh.
Um, and it's it's funny because I even though that was not a place where I wanted to live forever or for a long time, and it was not, I went there sort of under duress. It it still was a more positive experience than the 2 years that we spent living in bucolic rural upstate New York.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of a weird thing for me to kind of toss around in my head to be like, there was no way we would have stayed in Chattanooga full time, but at least the year I was there, even though I was missing my creative outlet and I was missing my friends and my community, I was like, at least there's culture here.
Right. Right.
Um, in a way that it was just missing from.
Did you guys have any thoughts when you were in Chattanooga of looking at Nashville?
Yes, actually, when Tim was interviewing for jobs, there was a potential job in Nashville that he
Okay.
was in the running for, and that one ended up not working out. And I was like, oh, it's a bummer because
Yeah, yeah.
that would have been a great place to end up. Absolutely. And that's also something where, like, if Chattanooga had ended up being a long-term situation. Nashville's not that far away,
Right.
so I probably would have started to make some moves in that direction just to see what was there. It is a very, very cool city and definitely a very, you know, um, definitely an option. I was bummed when he had two jobs in the South that were in the wings, and I was like, oh man, the one in rural northern Georgia is the one I had to work out, not the one in Nashville. Um, but yeah, no, that would have been a different experience too, because I think there would have been culture shock, but I think Nashville is a little bit more of a, you know,
More progressive for sure.
exactly. Yeah. Like Austin, I imagine it's a
Yeah,
little bit like that, so I think that would have been an easier adjustment for us. But that being said, uh, it would have been another starting from scratch, trying to find my people kind of situation. And, the older you get, the harder that becomes.
for sure.
So we got lucky that we were able to move back to the,
Jersey.
yeah, no, I mean, we were New Yorkers for so long, and all New Yorkers bag on New Jersey, and we were all like, oh man, now we have to live in Jersey. And I was like, well, I'm a big Bruce Springsteen fan. He's from Jersey. Can't be that bad.
Right.
Um, so we got lucky, and I'm very grateful because I'm now only I'm about an hour away from my friends at Brooklyn and an hour away from my folks in the Hudson Valley. So the music community. I mean, I still have to drive,
Right.
but it's close enough that it's not insurmountable. And also where we live in New Jersey, it's actually kind of like a nice kind of cool part of New Jersey as well. So people are like, oh yeah, we'll come see you too. It's not like,
Right.
like you're living in the trees or whatever. So
Good.
we got lucky. But yeah, it was, but it's been an adventure. It's been very strange when I look at that period of my life where 2019 I end up in a psych ward, 2020 I end up in a program that like forces me to kind of, recalibrate the way I regulate my emotions on top of the medications that help me regulate my emotions. And then nothing but chaos for the next four
Yeah.
years. And it was
Yes.
really like putting those skills to the test,
Definitely.
and I'm really grateful that I did that program because I don't know if I would have been able to get through all of that,
Yeah.
upheaval. And again, it's upheaval that mimics upheaval in my childhood that I did not enjoy. And it was like, okay, every 2 years we're moving again. Is that what we're going to do? Is this going to be our life again? And we moved back here, and I told Tim, I was like, this is it. We're not, you're, you're staying in this job until you retire. I'm sorry. That's, that's the new rule. And he was like, no, 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 I'm with you there. I'm with you. So, but yeah, again, it was just, it's odd when I think about it in context that I did this really amazing program that allowed me to reset my brain in a way that that also allowed me to kind of open a door to explore this creative part of myself that was about creating original music as opposed to playing covers, which
Yeah.
is a lot of what I did when I was at the music school. And then immediately after creating my first body of original work, just a bunch of upheaval, like moving, and then okay, trying to manage a band that lives all over the state, and
Yeah.
then all right, let's do the second album. Okay, we know how to do this. We've done this long distance before. Oh wait, no, now we're going to be moving to Chattanooga, so now we're going to be doing the second album with even more distance. And I was like, man, every time I release an album, I gotta stop moving every time I want to release an album. Um, but anyway, I mean, I guess the long and short of it though is that it's it's weird timing, but I guess it's helpful that I did this DBT program right before the pandemic, right? Well, yeah, I mean, right before lockdown.
Yeah,
Those tools did help with the rougher parts of being under lockdown.
for sure.
And they also helped me when I dealt with a bunch of upheaval in my, personal, like where we lived and how, how my life looked that I was not expecting to have to do at that point in my life as well.
For sure. Yeah.
Um,
Again, taking those tools and then being your own advocate with those tools, right?
mhm,
That's how I'm looking at this um, from the host perspective, and also too the amount of catharsis that can come from writing these songs,
mhm,
creating this music, allowing yourself to process those emotions, that grief, the different experiences that you had, the upheavals, the
mhm,
moving, being able to express that with music. Um, it does a couple of different things. It allows you to do the writing component, which is, helpful in and of itself, especially, from the toolkit that you got from being in the program there,
mhm.
having to work in that workbook, right?
Yeah,
Having to
yeah,
do
yeah,
homework.
yeah,
You got
yeah,
to put out that information based off of questions.
yeah.
So again, writing music is another process where you're using a different portion of your brain
Mhm,
because it's tactile and having to put down the words,
mhm.
write out the words, right? And then structure the way that that song's going to go.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you're incorporating the music component of it, which is about vibration.
Hmm. Yeah.
So when you're creating that combination of those two different elements of musicality together, it brings together something that can be healing, not only for yourself, but for others that hear it,
Mhm.
right?
Right. Right.
There's two different scenarios that come into play that I think are very profound. Even though it sucks to the nth degree having to go through the experience of what you did right before COVID, and then COVID happens and everybody's in lockdown, have no idea what's going on around us, no idea
Hmm.
what the future is going to be like, but it helps you get through it.
Yeah.
Now that you're on the other side of it, now you have a little bit of breathing room. You have a bit of catharsis that are taking place because now you've got two bodies of work that can
Yeah.
be put out that
Yeah.
you can look back on and expand off of in multiple ways as well.
Right.
Um,
Right.
with where you're at currently, is there, I know we talked about this before we got on the interview, but you're not in the huge promotion portion of the album release at this
Yeah.
point in time.
Not anymore. Yeah. No, the big push was basically from April through August 22nd is when the album came out. And so now I'm sort of in the denouement. There's still, there's still some promotion, but it's not as, and then to be an independent DIY on label, I don't have a label, I don't have a manager, I don't have a, I do have a publicist who's been helping me. She's a friend of a friend, and she's been helping me with some of the harder stuff.
Cool.
A lot of it is you got to do your own promotion, like talk about being your own advocate. It's a version of
Oh,
that. You just got to push yourself out there. It's that hustle thing that I told you that I'm not that good at,
yeah,
but you have
yeah,
to kind of force yourself, figure out you have to start thinking, you're like, what is my brand? And then I'm like, ew, I don't want to think of myself as a brand, but like that's, especially now in a world where like, marketing music is challenging because everybody has a 5-second attention span.
right.
And, like primarily what you're doing is you're trying to get people's attention on social media, and you've got people who are scrolling and scrolling. You want them to stop scrolling and pay attention to what you put out there.
Yeah,
Um, it's exhausting. So I'm not in that constantly like, okay, I got to post something every day. I got to do something every day. So that's a little bit of a relief because it's been crazy.
yeah,
Um, but Yeah, yeah, it's finally tapered off, and now we're focusing more on, like, I've got the band together, and we're focusing more on getting the material up to speed so that we can go and perform it live, because that's the thing that I really love. I don't know if it's what I love the most about music. I think what I love the most about music is the community that
Sure.
happens.
Makes sense. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
whether that's community in being in a band, or community being in a studio working with people who are also, being creative with you, and we're creating something together. It's the community part of it. But
Right.
I miss the live performance. I have not done a live show since 2022.
Okay.
So it's been a while.
Yeah.
A bit rusty. So I'm looking forward to that and being able to do that again, because that's something that I have missed. It's just a piece that's been kind of dormant. So
I can
um,
imagine. I can imagine. Does the live performance give you any reminiscence of being in the choir
it
at all?
absolutely does. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Especially in the when I first started doing those classes at Beacon Music Factory, and we would do those shows on the venues, like you learn all the Bruce Springsteen songs or whatever, and then you get to play it at like at a bar in town where they have music. And I remember the very first one I did, it was just like, I remember standing on stage, and I was like, this feels so familiar. And I couldn't really put my finger on it. And I was like, why does this feel familiar? This particular, it wasn't stage fright. It was this sort of, just like this sort of anticipatory, like, I'm here with a group of people who I really have come to like, and they're my friends now, and we're about to do a thing, and it'll be. And then I realized later, I was like, that's the choir experience. Okay, I'm standing on a stage with a bunch of people who I consider friends, and we're about to perform, and people will like it or they won't like it, but we're ready, and we're gonna do it. And
Yeah,
yeah,
definitely.
absolutely, absolutely. It felt very similar but different, because it's like, it's one thing to experience that as a child, and it feels very, like, almost primal as a child, like, oh, this is, like, very intense emotions, and these are my friends, and this is what's keeping me sane in a world where I'm unhappy at school and my mother is sick and all that stuff. And like, to come at it, 20 plus years later, I was in my 30s, and
Yeah.
my life looks very, very different. So it didn't have that, it didn't feel high stakes in a way that it did when I was a child, but it did have that same sort of, like, the warm fuzzies, like the kind of, like, okay, this is like, this feels like home,
Yeah.
you know.
I can
There's
imagine.
a return to that feeling. Yeah.
Very cool. I think that's actually a beautiful place for us to be able to end today, is that feeling like
Yeah.
home,
Yeah.
based on how the story went. One of the things that I always want to remind the audience at the end of each one of these episodes, as we close out, is to listen to your heart, but always be kind to your mind.
Oh, I love that.